This video is sponsored by Climate Power. I am deeply disturbed by the shooting in Utah. Doug and I send our prayers to Charlie Kirk and his family. Let me be clear, political violence has no place in America. I condemn this act, and we all must work together to ensure this does not lead to more violence. Political violence has no place in this country. Political violence of any kind and against any individual is unacceptable and completely incompatible with American values. But this kind of despicable violence has no place in our democracy. The attack on Charlie Kirk is disgusting, vile, and reprehensible. In the United States of America, we must reject political violence in every form. There is no place in our country for this kind of violence. It must end now. On September 10th, 2025, conservative commentator Charlie Kirk was fatally shot while speaking at an event at Utah Valley University. That makes the assassination of Charlie Kirk the 621st recorded school shooting in the United States since 2000. This is how long you have to scroll down on the Wikipedia page for a list of school shootings in the United States before you reach Charlie's death. It wasn't even the most casualties reported from a school shooting that day. In America, we like to render death invisible. We keep it far away, we assign it a number, a category. We deny its reality by deferring to concepts like war, evil, tragedy. Death is simply an abstraction until death becomes the dead, until the living use the dead to make death knowable. Why do we know the name Charlie Kirk and not number 621? What else can one say about Charlie Kirk that hasn't been said in every prayer, criticism, condemnation, celebration, eulogy, think piece, tweet, podcast, presidential address, or group chat? For all there is to say about Kirk's life, and we'll get there, few would celebrate anything about Kirk's death. This was a tragedy, not because I want to mourn Charlie's political legacy, but because even as Kirk's political life threatened the lives of marginalized people, his murder threatens the possibility of politics itself. A functioning democracy doesn't really survive the normalization of political violence, nor does a YouTube channel. So let me do the thing. This video is not an endorsement of political violence. I do not argue or believe that Charlie Kirk deserved to die, or that political assassinations are good, or that we must now use violence against political enemies. No. We shouldn't live in a country where political violence is the norm. Democracies work well because they channel conflict into nonviolent forms of resistance. Protest, elections, deliberation, political groups, parties, lobbying. Active political violence destroys democracies and hurts vulnerable groups the most. However, there's a difference between political violence as an action and political violence, the idea. In any regime, democratic or otherwise, the idea of political violence performs a crucial political function. And don't take it from me.
When you're founding a new regime, it is not possible to found a new regime without some form of political violence.
America only exists because of political violence. The American Revolution was the necessary precondition for the establishment of the American Constitutional Republic. We are one of many countries founded from a moment of violent uprising. We hope that violence is never necessary again. Yet, we're always haunted by the specter of its eternal possibility. That's part of why, in the United States, not all forms of speech are protected speech. You can't stand in a park and tell everyone to bomb Chipotle for that miserable portion of guac. Sometimes words about violence lead to real violence, but it's not always clear what that means. Would Quentin Tarantino have been held responsible if there was a mass genocide of Bills following the release of Kill Bill? Or sometimes it's possible to say things that don't directly call for violence, but that say paint certain groups as fundamentally incompatible with a functioning society. Even if words themselves aren't violence, even if they aren't inciting violence, words can absolutely create the conditions for violence. After the Charlie Kirk shooting, Republicans accused Democrats of doing just that.
That the left needs to tone down the rhetoric and needs to cut this crap out. Somebody's going to get hurt by it. But we cannot tell the American people that one candidate is a fascist.
Maybe someone should have told Charlie.
You're the fascist, Joe Biden.
Now, I could spend hours compiling all of the horrific or hypocritical things that a person or group said in the hopes that it might actually change someone's mind. And frankly, it's not hard to find Charlie Kirk saying something reprehensible.
Of course you should be able to use whips against foreigners that are coming into your country. Why is that controversial?
Wow, awful. Like, sure, we should hold people accountable for the consequences of their rhetoric, but it doesn't really help us understand why he said what he said. Or more importantly, why apparently millions of Americans seem to agree with what he said. When Barry Weiss asked Charlie Kirk's widow, Erica Kirk, about her late husband's controversial statements, Mrs. Kirk responded with something kind of true.
My husband is not to be deteriorated to two sentences. He's not. He is a thought leader, and he was brilliant of a man. So that's fine if you want to take words out of his mouth or out of context without the whole thing. But that's the problem.
People aren't just collections of quotes. Politics is more than just language. So what if we were to make a genuine effort to understand Charlie as a person? If Charlie is a thought leader, then why don't we take the time to examine what he actually thought? I've spent the last several months putting together, to the best of my ability, a comprehensive picture of who Charlie Kirk was, or at least what his public political life truly stood for. And while I think it's obvious that Kirk's political work perpetuated prejudice, racism, misogyny, Islamophobia, and of course, hate, I believe that this is an incomplete assessment. Hate is a fickle and fleeting emotion, not a political orientation. Political movements are too complex to run on hate alone. In contemporary American politics, hate is just one part of the engine of an inconceivably rotten machine underlying the right wing's grander project. Contemporary American conservatism is a well-funded and well-organized extremist movement that is, without exaggeration, actively trying to destroy American society as we know it to install an authoritarian Christian oligarchy. Charlie was not just a witness to this, he was an architect. If we trace Charlie Kirk's political journey from Tea Party libertarian to authoritarian Christian nationalist, we find a perfect case study of how, and more importantly, why American conservatism has changed so much in the past 20 years. When liberal political commentators joined the bandwagon in saying that Kirk did politics right, or when Democratic leaders admire his passion and commitment for debate, they're falling for the bait. Kirk wasn't some right-of-center classical liberal who believed in a robust deliberative democracy. His public debates and online persona were the tip of a carefully crafted iceberg. Charlie Kirk will go down in history as one of the chief architects of American fascism. This video is a comprehensive commentary that covers American conservatism's recent political transformation, with Charlie Kirk's life as our representative case. We'll try to outline a framework for American politics going forward. This video is also a tragic narrative. There's heroes and villains, victories and tragedies, and well, the ending, that's up to you. It all starts with a question. On July 8th, 2025, J.D. Vance, emo prince of millennial fascism, delivered a speech on what he thought to be the most important issue of our time.
So I believe one of the most pressing problems for us to face as statesmen is to redefine the meaning of American citizenship in the 21st century.
Notice how he didn't say clarify or restore or uphold. He said redefine. Vance and his conservative party admit that they aren't here to conserve. They're here to offer us a new answer. What is an American? For years, both conservatives and liberals believed that the answer was self-evident. America's an idea, Jack. America isn't an ethnicity, race, or religion. everyone agreed that Americans were a people linked only by a shared belief in the Constitution. From Democrats,
America's an idea.
The United States of America is the greatest idea.
to Republicans.
America's the only nation founded on an idea.
Anyone from any corner of the earth can come to live in America and become an American.
Yup. Even the ontologically evil Ronald Reagan understood this.
We draw our people, our strength, from every country and every corner of the world.
But now there's a new generation of conservatives with a different definition of America. These individuals travel under different names: National Conservatives, American Traditionalists, Christian Nationalists, and they're probably radicalizing your local white boy. They argue that America isn't an idea. America is a people, a particular group of people with a shared heritage.
But America is not just an idea. America is a nation. It is a group of people with a common history and a common future. And yes, thank you.
Huh. Wait, which group? What heritage?
It's our heritage, our destiny. We Americans are the sons and daughters of the Christian pilgrims that poured out from Europe's shores to baptize a new world in their ancient faith.
Oh, okay, sure. This isn't gonna end well. Should we be concerned that these people run the government now? Well, yeah. A good chunk of these national conservatives didn't start believing these ideas until recently. One of those people was Charlie Kirk. This was Charlie Kirk in 2019.
America's just a placeholder for timeless ideas. And if you fall too in love with, the specific place and all this, that's not what it is.
And this is what he said less than a month before he died.
America was at its peak when we halted immigration for 40 years and we dropped our foreign-born percentage to its lowest level ever. We have 55 million foreigners in this country, but we got to take a step back and say, guys, that you're no longer a nation. You're something else. You're a colony.
Hey, did anyone notice that 55 million number includes any foreign-born person in the United States, whether they be citizens, legal residents, or undocumented? And do you think it ends there? Do you think it ends with targeting immigrants? Today, the target is foreign-born individuals, but maybe tomorrow it's anyone with foreign-born parents. Maybe it won't have anything to do with national origins. Maybe the target will be a certain racial group, sexualities, Democratic voters. How did we get here and where are we going? If we can understand how someone like Charlie Kirk went from believing in America the idea to America the people, then we'll be able to understand kind of everything. So let's talk about Charlie Kirk.
If you're seeing this, I'm probably dead.
Charlie was raised in an upper-middle-class Republican household in the suburbs of 1990 Chicago. As a Republican kid surrounded by a Democratic voting community, Charlie was destined to be an outcast.
I was a bit of a contrarian right from the beginning. My first vivid memory of issue-oriented discussion was debating a teacher in 6th grade about climate change.
As Charlie tells it, he was the only one willing to stand up to liberal indoctrination.
High school teachers and college professors are incredibly tolerant of other people's views as long as you share their own.
But journalist Kyle Spencer tracked down Charlie's classmates and asked them to recall what Charlie was actually like.
As they remember it, Charlie was often told to pipe down. Not so much because of his views, but because he was rude, making the atmosphere inside the classroom unsettling. Despite his later assertions that liberals are dead set on their ideas and intolerant of dissent, classmates said that Charlie had a superiority complex and did not tolerate disagreement.
When Charlie graduated from high school, he didn't immediately start a career in political activism. He wanted to take over the world. In fact, his classmates literally named him most likely to take over the world. No, Charlie wanted greatness. Charlie dreamed of attending West Point Military Academy. Getting into West Point is hard. Charlie did everything he could to become perfect. And even after leading the high school's sports teams, rising the ranks of Boy Scouts, and testing well, West Point told him that it wasn't enough. They rejected him. And what did Charlie have to say about that?
Unfortunately, I was waitlisted and I eventually lost my spot out to what I felt was a far less qualified applicant in my district that was of a different gender and a different persuasion. You could take it any way you want, but I knew the test scores, I knew the qualifications. I was kind of got the short end of the stick.
Oh, so it was actually affirmative action's fault. Damn you, woke point. Or maybe it wasn't. Classmates recall that Charlie once told his chemistry teacher that he didn't believe in homework. Now, tell me, does it make sense that such a committed anti-homework rebel should feel entitled to a spot at the most selective military academy in the country? Yet, this is the mythology that Kirk fashioned for himself in his early years. An origin story as a misunderstood libertarian debate prodigy, marginalized for his own genius.
Constantly getting in debates, or as I like to call enlightened conversations with my teachers. And I spent a lot of time out in the hall in high school, especially in economics class, because that's what the left does. They're the most intolerant group of people that you've ever met their entire life.
But the truth is, frankly, a little sad.
I was a minority in my high school, which was really interesting, growing up in kind of that kind of environment.
Here we have a tragic political pathology, an insecure teen isolated from the majority of his peers for being rude and confrontational. It was probably really easy to bully the weird Republican kid who doesn't know how to act around people of color. I mean, wouldn't you?
And I learned so much about different cultures, and honestly, that's really where I got my kind of focus on politics, because I was always naturally conservative, loved America, loved the values that our country stood for, and I never understood why you'd want to deviate from that. And then I found myself trying to convince these ideas to people that had never heard or never met a Republican conservative in their entire life. And I knew people that were in this country illegally. I went to high school with them, right? So for me, it was a really personal connection.
People like Charlie Kirk often think they're entitled to status and recognition. And when the reality hits them that not everyone is going to cater to that entitlement, that his underpaid teachers and annoyed classmates didn't want to argue about libertarianism during class time, Charlie grew bitter and resentful. But since in the real world, Charlie was a part of a majority in a way his minority classmates never would be, Charlie knew he could find that status and recognition elsewhere. He channeled his resentment into politics in a way that would define his career forever. Freshly rejected from West Point, Kirk decides to take a gap year to get involved in local politics. Libertarianism, with its low-tax, free market, and small government stance, calls to the young Charlie for some reason. Does it make sense that a 17-year-old with no assets, business, or income wants to cut taxes and regulation? In spite of this, the young Charlie joined his local Tea Party. A tea party? Aw, Charlie, is that like a fun little afternoon with your little boyfriends? No, it's more like a nightmarish afternoon with a bunch of divorced uncles. The Tea Party was a fiscally conservative movement funded by oil billionaires masquerading as a popular patriotic uprising. Tea Partiers wanted lower taxes, less government spending, and little to no treading on me. Charlie started as a Tea Party guy through and through. As a teen, he spoke at local gatherings, networked with supporters in the Chicago business community, hoping to get something off the ground.
So here I am on June 5th of 2012, lacking the two things that you really need to succeed in politics: money and connections.
In May of 2012, while delivering a speech at Benedictine University, Charlie found a way in. His speech caught the eye of Bill Montgomery, a retired businessman with a passion for mentoring local conservative youth. Billiam gave Charles a piece of advice.
A really amazing mentor by the name of Bill Montgomery, may he rest in peace, he said, "Charlie, you shouldn't go to college."
Montgomery encouraged Kirk to put his talents to use by starting something of his own. Perhaps a conservative organization that would reach Charlie's generation better than the grand old poopers ever could. Montgomery had the business and marketing experience. Charlie had the young face and energy. They called their project Turning Point USA. Kirk's disciples like to claim that TPUSA started with Charlie pulling up to college campuses and debating his way into stardom.
He started with nothing more than an idea and a folding table.
12 years ago, Charlie walked onto his first college campus. He set up a card table and put up a sign with 3 words: "Big government sucks."
But no, he didn't. He started with the help of a millionaire who had powerful friends. That's not to say that Charlie didn't work hard, but a lot of people work hard. Not everyone has a millionaire mentor. Over the next few months, Charlie and Bill hit the road, traveling to Tea Party gatherings across the Midwest, networking, building connections, and importantly, trying to fund someone to fully finance their message. Soon enough, they found themselves entangled in the Republican Party political machine. Do you ever get the feeling that the Republican Party might just be evil? Oh, I'm sorry, am I being divisive?
I hate my opponent. And I don't want the best for them, I'm sorry.
We have to understand that there's a difference between the diverse group of voters who, for whatever reason, vote Republican, and the Republican establishment, the machine. Study its history, and you'll find that modern American conservatism, yes, including Charlie Kirk's conservatism, is largely the product of a small, insular group of elitists. To understand Charlie Kirk, we have to understand how that happened.
This is Fred C. Koch. He started his career as a chemical engineer for the American oil industry in the 1920s and 30s. After accumulating fabulous wealth, in 1940 he founded an oil firm that would soon be known as Koch Industries. How did Fred do it? Well, sometimes you're just at the right place at the right time. And because of that, sometimes you find yourself in business with the Third Reich and Stalinist Russia. But Fred wasn't a bad guy. In fact, Fred wasn't really a fan. Of Stalinism, that is. He thought the Nazis were actually pretty chill and praised their work ethic. But communism? Well, Fred, a patriotic believer in the American free market, saw communism as the biggest threat to the American way of life. Again, the Nazis were fine though. In 1958, he co-founded the John Birch Society, an anti-communism, anti-big government, and anti-civil rights activist group, because of course he was racist. When Fred passed away in 1967, his sons, Charles and David, inherited not only his vast fortune, but their father's political spirit. But Charlie and Dave weren't satisfied with just quietly funding candidates. They wanted to change American society itself. Soon enough, they would get their wish, but it wasn't going to be easy. What we call fiscal conservatism today, like cutting government spending, cutting welfare, low taxes, for the most part, these ideas have never really been broadly popular in the United States, at least up until recently. While it is true that Americans hate paying taxes, Americans also like the social services that they benefit from. For example, the two largest government programs, Medicare and Social Security, have enjoyed consistent public support since their inception. Bitches love post-war liberal welfare states. Even though Americans generally like government programs, they don't always like the government. In 1964, when Americans were asked if they trusted the federal government to do what is right at least most of the time, 77% said yes. But in the next decade or so, that trust fell dramatically. With the failure of Vietnam, civil unrest in the 60s, and finally the Watergate scandal in the early 70s, public trust in government fell to its lowest point, 36%, and it has never truly recovered. With American trust in government so low in the 1970s, libertarians and fiscal conservatives saw an opportunity, which brings us back to the Koch brothers. Throughout the 1970s, the brothers poured billions of dollars into funding, if not founding, institutions that promoted anti-government libertarianism. And the Koch brothers weren't the only ones doing this. Ultra-wealthy conservatives like Richard Scaife, John Olin, the Bradley brothers, most of whom made their fortune in the oil industry, spent billions to transform libertarianism from a fringe idea into an institutionally backed political project. Think tanks, university research centers, conferences, packaged with obscure names like the Cato Institute, the Institute for Humane Studies, the Manhattan Institute, all to hide the fact that they were fronts for the political agenda of a few billionaires. Since most of these were established as nonprofits, they were under no legal obligation to disclose their donors. Money could flow from anywhere, from anyone. This is what's known as dark money.
In the 80s and 90s, these free market, limited government ideas found their way into policy agendas, a trend today known as neoliberalism. Neoliberalism infected all of American politics, but its most extreme and dangerous form found a home in the Republican Party. By the late 2000s and 2010s, right around the time a young Charlie Kirk became politically active, dark money was bigger than ever before, and most of it was going to conservatives. Two important things happened around this time. Possibly three. Life was slower back then. First, in September of 2008, the American financial market collapsed, leaving millions of Americans economically destitute and increasingly skeptical of corporate influence. The second important thing happened a month later, when Americans elected Barack Obama, the Democratic presidential candidate who promised to rein in Wall Street excesses and restore faith in the government. According to my sources, that did not happen.
People were angry. dark money seized the moment. The Koch-backed Americans for Prosperity hosted rallies trashing Obama-era stimulus, building email lists, training organizers, and quietly workshopping a way to rebrand people's populist anger into something more billionaire-friendly. They called it the Tea Party. The AFP worked behind the scenes to turn the Tea Party into a real movement. They offered talking points, websites, hype, transportation, merch. Sure, there were true believers in the movement, everyday self-described patriots who truly, really believed in the cause. But the AFP's friends in right-wing media made the movement look like a completely spontaneous uprising of fed-up taxpayers, when it was anything but. Among that crowd of patriots, somewhere in the Midwest around 2012, stood a young Charlie Kirk, networking with fellow Tea Partiers to help build Turning Point USA. Charlie was a true believer, yet he knew that politics was about more than belief. When Charlie was finally ready, his mentor, Bill Montgomery, showed him the other side of politics. That year, Bill introduced Charlie to Mike Miller, a local jeweler whose luxury products attracted hundreds of elite contacts. This was Charlie's way in. One contact led to more contacts, more conversations. Conversations led to invitations, which led to deals and eventually, donors. Soon enough, Charlie was being flown across the country, soliciting donations from Christian oil barons and the whitest of Anglo-Saxon Protestants. A few handshakes later, and Charlie had hustled his way onto Fox News, presenting himself as the face of a new growing generation of libertarian youth. Or at least, that's the story Charlie needed to sell. As he wrote in his first autobiography, "We are going to show you what can happen when the principles of individual liberty and free markets are messaged properly to the right audiences, and then delivered through comprehensive machinery and infrastructure that takes those principles and splices them into every American's intellectual and spiritual DNA."
Like so many of the conservative organizations before it, TPUSA soon found itself in a network of right-wing dark money. Don't get me wrong, Charlie was talented. He knew how to talk. He knew what words would scare old rich white people into opening their pocketbooks, which, frankly, is one of the most lucrative skills one could have. But what exactly did he say to them? To the many paranoid Christian billionaires he schmoozed, Charlie spun tales of predatory political conspiracy. He told them that universities were cesspools of Marxist communism, liberal professors are indoctrinating your children, gayifying your grandchildren, silencing any opposition, convincing them that civil rights are good, and leading America down a path toward a limp-wristed, multicultural, globalist New World Order. Luckily, there's a way to save your grandchildren's souls. There's an organization of young visionaries called Turning Point USA, and they're willing to fight in the trenches, spread the free market gospel, and change college culture from the inside. But here's the thing. Charlie only attended college part-time for less than 1 semester. Frankly, it doesn't seem like enough time to draw a conclusive narrative about what life in American universities are actually like. He literally did not even give it the good old college try. Yet he positioned himself as an expert on higher education. He dubbed college a scam.
When you're in high school, your counselors and your teachers are telling you have to go to college to be successful. You have to get a 4-year degree. And unfortunately, that's not the reality.
I mean, yeah, sure, you don't technically need a college education to be successful, especially if you're a rich kid like Charlie who fell into the lap of elite conservative sugar daddies fresh out of high school. But for the overwhelming majority of low and middle income people, college education, even in a useless degree like sociology, is one of the most effective methods of achieving class mobility by far. There's a lot to criticize about universities as institutions that perpetuate liberal elitism and maintain class divides, whatever. But the solution to that is to expand access to college education, not destroy it. There's a reason why the same conservatives who say college is a scam also went to some of the most elite private universities in the country. Conservative elites resent the fact that universities offer the middle class an opportunity to challenge their elite status. That's why Donald Trump, graduate of an Ivy League university who sent all of his children to expensive private universities, says shit like this.
We won with poorly educated. I love the poorly educated.
Republicans know that college exposes potential voters to new ideas, people, and research that challenges traditional conservative values. Climate research, social research, medical research, being around a diverse community of people, all of that tends to shatter the Republican narrative. That's why they need young people like Charlie to lie on their behalf. Charlie wasn't very good at it at first. In 2012 and 2013, Turning Point USA struggled to gain momentum, probably because their message stunk. Let me demonstrate.
It's 2012. You're about to graduate college, the financial crisis is fresh in your memory, boomers have destroyed the economy, and the job market is a steaming pile of garbage. All you've got is about 100 credits in your sociology degree, and, well, your immediate employment prospects aren't looking great. But whatever. You're home for the holidays, and you just want to forget all of it. You're hanging out in the living room with your grandpa, and since he's a boomer, Fox News is in the background. You mostly ignore it until suddenly you hear this.
New study says college students are more entitled. They feel themselves more entitled than ever.
Did this guy just fly in from Stupid Town? How am I entitled after working my ass off for the past 4 years, working part-time to pay for school, getting ghosted from hundreds of job applications?
Charlie Kirk is from Turning Point USA.
Oh, well, maybe this young guy gets it.
And the problem is they think so highly of themselves, and in return, they want something as far as, I want a free education because I'm good in school. Or I want a free job that is even more higher paying than my parents.
Now that's entitlement.
Of course.
A free job? A free job? It's a job. They're supposed to pay you.
And we're teaching young people that the society of free markets and capitalism is going to bring more opportunity for you rather than a government handout.
Old boomer donors ate this shit up. But TPUSA was supposed to be for young people. Instead, they were talking down to young people. Even the kids in TPUSA's first ads seem to have the enthusiasm of a turnip.
Our generation is in trouble.
It's time for action. Time to take a stand.
Politicians have bankrupted us,
both fiscally and morally.
If we don't stand for what we believe in,
we will lose our basic freedoms and liberties.
Wow. To a college student in 2012, TPUSA represented the worst thing you can possibly be. An elitist, stuffy, smug mouthpiece for the establishment. The man, with a younger face. The man is still the man, even if he looks like a boy. Does this face represent the voice of a generation? Do I really need to know about baseline budgeting? White guy, bow tie, white guy. No one wants to be talked down to. It's a lesson that Charlie should have learned after feeling persecuted by his liberal teachers. Why didn't he capitalize on that feeling? To be fair, Charlie kind of had his hands tied at this point. In a pre-Trump world, elite conservatives found anti-establishment sentiment too messy. I mean, what if the voters find out who they're actually supposed to be angry at? But that was soon to change. As Charlie Kirk mingled with conservative socialites, he befriended lactic power couple Lee and Allie Hanley. How to describe the Hanleys? The Hanleys were ultra-politically connected, ultra-rich petroleum tycoons who, like many of their peers, funneled their fortunes into libertarian think tanks and Christian advocacy. They weren't just rich in the sense of having a ton of money. You could win $1 billion in the lottery and still never get what the Hanleys had. Status, legacy, blood, heritage, connections, tradition. They were capital R rich, white, East Coast country club, Ivy League, white, Judeo-Christian loving, skin sagging, oil spilling, dark money, white, old school Republicans. They built their reputations behind the scenes, nurturing young political talent, including the ontologically evil Ronald Reagan. They played host to like-minded donors, connecting the rich and powerful through lavish fundraising events. One day in 2013, they came across Charlie. Whatever he said to them, it must have been either charming or scary enough to work, because soon he was their newest pet project. Suddenly, Kirk had access to a whole new world of connections. Everything was coming together. There was just one thing. Americans were getting tired of the Republican agenda. You see, back in 2014,
the Hanleys commissioned the prolific political pollster Pat Goodell.
They wanted to understand this new post-economic crisis cultural climate, so they gathered the data. Their research revealed that a new anti-establishment political wave was about to take over politics. In Goodell's words, the level of discontent in this country was beyond anything imaginable. The Hanleys shared their findings with a small group of insiders, including a 20-year-old Charlie Kirk. By all indications, it seemed that America was ripe for a new message, a fresh, young vision, a turning point, if you will. Charlie Kirk didn't start TPUSA out of a concern for the plight of young people. He, like many other Americans in the 2010s, wanted revenge. But Charlie wasn't like other Americans. He didn't want revenge against the bank for closing his house or the insurance companies for denying him life-saving treatment. He wanted revenge against the liberals in his life who made him feel small.
Is anytime I'd use these things called facts, and I'd always remind her that facts don't have feelings, I would always be kicked out into the hallway.
Charlie knew how energizing conflict could be, and he had an idea of how the right could use that themselves.
All across America, on campuses and in offices, political correctness is getting freedom-loving citizens to take off their clothes, act like a chicken, and jump out of a 12-story window. I have no intention of surrendering our language to Team Left, and I have every intention of doing what is necessary to recapture what has been lost.
While the idea of conflict made some of his elite donors uncomfortable, soon enough, they too realized that it was time for a change. The Republican Party wasn't getting any younger, as Charlie wrote.
While some of our donors were nervous at first, they came to realize that we knew how to connect with people of our own demographic.
Eventually, they let Charlie loose.
How do you get young people then revved up to vote? Well, Charlie Kirk's hoping these three words do it. Big government sucks.
If the Republicans want to engage young people, they need to do so in a manner that gets their attention in an edgy, innovative campaign.
TPUSA launched the Big Government Sucks campaign to modest success. A simple, eye-catching phrase with a small government message. It taught him an important lesson about messaging.
One of the more effective weapons, if not the most effective, that the other side has deployed is its use and control of language and speech.
Soon enough, Charlie found himself at the precipice of a new political landscape. And 2 years later, well, you know what happened.
We will make America great again. Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you very much.
We often think about politics as something that happens in certain buildings or as the thing we do every 4 years at the ballot box. But politics isn't really about these procedures or voting or debate. That's not politics, that's governance, power, participation, all of which happens after politics. Politics itself, the political, in its essence, is a social phenomenon. It is the process of a collective choosing to identify as a people, of articulating what binds that people, and of that people transforming their shared will into practical action. But for politics to be ethical, it must also be universal. Authentic social movements appeal to collective universal humanity, not to particular identities or interests. Political movements translate the diversity of struggles into a shared struggle for a new universal principle. Political movements reorganize systems by instituting new truths. While Trumpism had all the materials for the making of an authentic political movement, Trumpism didn't appeal to universal humanity. It didn't want justice. It wanted revenge.
However, there is something completely rational about the anger that Donald Trump is tapping into. And that's what I think is really wrong about the Donald Trump analysis, that somehow he's tapping into this frothing bath of people that are just irrationally angry at the system. And the number one critique I have of the pundits and the talk show hosts that go after Donald Trump is the people who are supporting him are quite frankly very rational about their anger.
Hey, America, why are you so angry? In the early and mid-20th century, Western governments, including the United States, began building robust social welfare programs to develop their middle class and temper their desire for socialism. You know, things like helping the elderly, home loan assistance, work programs, the good stuff. However, in the United States, where racism has been central to social life since the beginning of chattel slavery, white people ended up becoming the primary beneficiaries of these new programs, which actually worked out tremendously well for white people, if you haven't noticed. In the 1960s, civil rights movements sought to dismantle these systemic barriers, both the explicit legal kind and the larger structural economic kind. New social programs were created that would, in theory, help combat the economic barriers disproportionately faced by people of color. Though imperfect, I'd say that giving poor children healthcare and food was generally a step in the right direction. Then, in the 1970s, the world economy pooped itself, for complex geopolitical reasons, and the particular way in which it pooped itself was so unprecedented that people lost their minds looking for an explanation. Americans needed something or someone to blame. So Republicans dangled a little carrot in front of the white middle class. Hey, just asking questions, but wasn't it so much better when welfare programs were going to white people? Or, as the ontologically evil Ronald Reagan put it,
in 1964, the famous war on poverty was declared. And a funny thing happened. Poverty, as measured by dependency, stopped shrinking and then actually began to grow worse. I guess you could say poverty won the war. Poverty won in part because instead of helping the poor, government programs ruptured the bonds holding poor families together.
Except that's not true. Poverty was decreasing up until the 1970s. Economic stagnation was a global phenomenon. You can't attribute it to any singular domestic policy. Ronald Wilson Reagan, 3 names, 6 letters each, 666. Are you getting it yet? But no matter. The carrot was dangled. Americans blamed their suffering on what was characterized as the undeserving poor, as the often non-white social parasites destroying American excellence. Social safety nets were cut and inequality shot up. On the surface, proponents of neoliberalism seek to maximize human freedom through free markets. So instead of using the government to organize society and the economy, neoliberals think that the economy should take care of most things. What does that look like in practice? Well, let's check up on the late 20th century. Austerity replaced public investment, unions were kneecapped, economic inequality skyrocketed. Unfettered capitalism isn't just a political or economic ideology, there's an underlying moral project here. Capitalism assumes that conflict is natural and inevitable, which, fair enough. Maybe conflict is just part of human nature, whatever that is. But is all conflict really inevitable? Is it natural and inevitable that there's an enormous wealth disparity between white and black families in the United States? Is it natural and inevitable that 30% of Americans skip medical appointments because they're too expensive? Or could it actually be that some conflicts are the products of exploitative systems and individuals, none of which are natural and inevitable, but in fact artificial and preventable? When capitalism has us by the balls, corporations have to maintain the illusion that everything is fine. They want their workers to get along and to not be racist to each other, at least on company time. So corporate entities have enlisted a class of mostly well-meaning people forced to reconcile social justice with corporate interests. This is the origin of what we call woke, the DEI, the PC, and other offshoots of neoliberal morality. This very calculated, unchallenging notion of social justice that doesn't actually seek to change anything. Charlie Kirk spent much of his career critiquing this thing that we call wokeness. Most of the time, wokeness is just a buzzword conservatives use when they're mad that there's more than one person of color in a movie, but there is some truth to the idea that neoliberal society gives rise to this joyless corporate morality of artificial inclusion.
Where is an intellectual liberal that's able to generate enthusiasm? I mean, they have professors, like, great, okay, you can go listen to nonsense from overly educated elitist academics. They have no cultural ethos at all.
There's a nugget of truth there. A pure free market ideology makes it seem as if economic conflict and its products, like inequality and exploitation, are just natural and inevitable. Meanwhile, public-facing corporate culture tells us that all social conflict must be managed by some faceless bureaucratic entity.
The lie of the West, of modernity, the last 30 years, is that we're going to have you live and let live and there will be no moral standard. That itself is a moral standard, and it's a really bad one.
We feel powerless to do anything, and we don't have a stake in society or any voice in creating culture. This is the type of frustration that people like Charlie Kirk feed upon, even as his party offers no solutions.
Like, imagine your name is Ken. Your town's been hollowed out from offshoring and deindustrialization, the factory closed, the union vanished, stable jobs were replaced by temp work. No one ever really explained why, they just told you to adapt, to be positive. Your company started putting up these posters telling you to say the right words, ignore differences, to see the company as one big happy family. But now your family is cutting your hours. Your health premiums are going up. Your coworkers, your friends, were just replaced by people who don't speak your language. You don't know how to talk to them. It doesn't feel like a family anymore. There's a man on the TV. He doesn't tell you to adapt or to use the right words. He says that actually things were going just fine until the moment they showed up. And for the first time, someone says what you were too afraid to say out loud. You start to get angry.
We're familiar with this type of anger. The story of Trump is the story about how this type of anger carried Trump to victory in the Rust Belt. But Ken isn't the only one who's angry. A lot of people are angry. But why is it that we hear so much about Ken's anger and not others? There are people like Ken who are black, whose communities have also been destroyed by deindustrialization on top of suburban flight, over-policing, mass incarceration, and Ken's new co-workers are probably more similar to Ken than he thinks. They probably share a lot of Ken's values about God and family. They're trying their best to learn Ken's language, and they at least try to say good morning, but Ken doesn't ever say it back. And just like Ken, they're overworked, underpaid, and alienated. They too are angry, because everyone is angry.
But if someone who disagrees with Ken gets angry, well, they're violent. They're radical.
They've grown increasingly violent because they understand that they are losing. They're losing a lot of turf.
But if Ken gets angry and storms the Capitol, well, that's just what you get for being so mean.
You can only insult and poke people in the eye for so long until they're going to burst.
Popular anger is the symptom of a society ill-equipped to deal with conflict. When we're told to pretend that identity is just a free-floating surface, just a thing that you have to respect, a consumer group at which to target ads, and not a social force tied to money, power, and history, well, then inevitably that repressed conflict is going to make a return. We can feel that conflict in our bones. And when we're forced to choose between a candidate who denies the existence of conflict altogether,
Donald Trump's dark and divisive vision, he offered a lot of fear and anger. You could listen to that speech and you could think, my goodness, he believes America is in decline.
Or someone who not only acknowledges conflict, but revels in it.
They're not coming after me, they're coming after you, and I just happen to be standing in their way. And it is the enemy from within, and they're very dangerous.
Well, I'm not surprised that millions of Americans made the choice they did. Even though Trumpism offers no solutions and actively hurts the most vulnerable Americans, if he seems to be the only one able to give your anger a name, an identity, then of course people followed him off a cliff. And all Democrats did was deny.
That the hateful language they hear from public figures on TV does not represent the true spirit of this country.
Charlie Kirk wasn't always a fan of Trump. After all, he started his career as one of those conservative neoliberals who worshipped the market. But he also understood that the anger underlying Trump's popularity couldn't simply be ignored. As Kirk wrote in his book, The MAGA Doctrine,
Republicans have been playing the part of hectoring moralists. Trump reversed that, revealing what young conservatives already knew. The future of the Democrat Party is whiners and killjoys. The future of the Republican Party is winners.
So how would Charlie Kirk find a way to win the young? Same way as Trump. Give anger a face and a name. TPUSA's initial public reach wasn't very good. Take their YouTube channel. 10 years later, these early videos still struggled to reach even 5,000 views. But the first video to truly pop off on the Turning Point USA channel was uploaded in 2017. It was titled, Charlie Kirk Destroys Democratic Socialism. It was the first of a familiar format. Kirk standing at a podium, taking a question from an audience member. Kirk responds with a fiery, confident takedown. The debate clip pops off. It gets hundreds of thousands of views. A few months later, they try the format again. Socialist admits their real agenda. Boom. Charlie smashes socialism. Top 5 takedowns of 2017. Boom. 2 million views. Slowly, TPUSA started to understand what worked. Charlie Kirk, taking a question from a college student who frankly isn't super well researched on the topic, Kirk rhetorically maneuvers his way around the question in a way that makes the leftist interlocutor look weak. Why does it work? Well, I don't know, it's cathartic. It's exactly what a young Charlie Kirk would have probably watched. It's everything he always wanted to be. To win the argument, show his power, feel special. Young conservative-minded people watching this content probably felt the same. Even special. like they're in some cool little club. Charlie's a guy who really gets it. Charlie's smart and unique, just like me, like a snowflake. Thus began Charlie's career in owning the libs, fanning the flames of conflict, and calling it free speech.
I'm a free speech absolutist, through and through. Aristotle said we are the speaking beings, that our capacity to communicate is who we are.
Huh, the Greeks, huh? Well, if we're gonna get gay about it, we might learn a thing or two from those Greeks, considering that, you know, they invented democracy. Although, can you really trust such an olive-heavy society? In ancient Athenian democracy, parrhesia, sometimes translated as frank or open speech, was a key force in civic life. It's analogous to free speech today, but it's not quite the same. You couldn't just say whatever you wanted or call your enemies pansies for fun. Underlying parrhesia was a set of ethical principles. Political speech is an act of speaking truth to power. For this act to be meaningful, though, the speaker has to be taking on some level of risk. If someone is willing to risk their life for a truth, then they must really believe it, right? And I mean genuine risk. Pundits whose organization is funded by billionaire elites risk very little, which isn't to say that political figures don't get, famously assassinated, but that's the type of risk that's inherent to being any type of public figure at all. The risk we're talking about here is something like getting arrested or murdered by the state. Risk isn't the only thing that's important, though. Being edgy for its own sake is empty. Parrhesia is supposed to be a helpful exercise in political truth. You're supposed to see your interlocutor as a fellow citizen, someone who you hope benefits from your words. True parrhesia appeals to universal political principles, not just to your side. Was that what Charlie was doing when he uploaded a video whose title starts with "Charlie Kirk unloads on woke lib"? Truly powerful political speech must be an earnest exercise in truth. Is it good faith and truth-seeking for Charlie to text his mentor, "Can you please send me quotes from Jefferson or the founders that were negative on Islam, please?" Yes, that's a real text, and no, it's not good faith truth-seeking. He was a person who instrumentalized rhetoric for cultural victory, which is exactly antithetical to why free speech exists in the first place. Charlie believed that speech functioned like a market. A free market.
What we need is a robust marketplace of speech where the best ideas can win.
According to him, if we just channel all of our conflicts into speech, then we can resolve all of society's problems through speech.
It's a very fragile line that we live in. And you know what keeps that line? Do you know what prevents us from going into situations like this? One thing: freedom of speech.
But that doesn't work because it ignores that speech itself is a part of social conflict. It even produces social conflict. What we perceive to be reasonable depends on who's speaking, the context, the tone of their voice, the speed at which they talk, the medium of the message, and of course, whether or not the speaker is a media-trained pundit on a goddamn podium. If you're a liberal or leftist watching this video, a person of color, a non-Christian, an immigrant, even someone who has ever voted for a Democrat, people like Charlie Kirk never wanted to debate you. They wanted you gone. How do I know this? Because I debated Charlie Kirk. In the fall of 2019, I was a freshman at Brown University. In my first semester at Brown, it was announced that Charlie Kirk, the famous conservative commentator, would be paying a visit to the university to give a talk and debate students. It would be the first time that Charlie Kirk had visited an Ivy League university, and, for good reason, his last. My friends decided to make shitty protest signs for the night. Here's a picture from the Providence Journal of me and my bud in front of the building where Charlie was about to speak. So I didn't arrive in time to make my own sign, and as a result, I'm holding literally the most confusing sign ever. It quotes Charlie Kirk in big letters where he once said, "Donald Trump is the most moral president ever," which to us was a self-evidently bad quote, but it just looks like I'm holding up a sign that says, "Donald Trump is the most moral president ever." But whatever. It comes time for the event. Me and my friends wiggle our way to the back of the auditorium. Apparently, the event wasn't being filmed. No cameras or recording devices allowed. That's kind of weird, right? But we didn't think much of it. Charlie comes out on stage. The Brown Republican Club, sitting front and center, goes wild. Charlie starts giving his speech. It wasn't anything earth-shattering, just a collection of stupid talking points. Men shouldn't be in women's sports, abortion is murder, the usual shit that's supposed to rile up college students in 2019. Then came the Q&A portion. We all ran for the opportunity to talk to him.
I don't remember all of the specifics of the night, but I do remember my fellow Brown students being, for the most part, sharp, precise, intellectually good faith, put together. Charlie, on the other hand, interrupted students, tried to maneuver the conversation away from the main point, and at some point he started to get frustrated, even flustered. There were points where Charlie even conceded, because as it turns out, when he's talking to people who actually understand what they're talking about, he just flounders. Then my turn came. I asked Charlie about healthcare. I don't remember much of the specifics, but I remember at some point just going in circles. I kept arguing that, hey, patients don't really have bargaining power in a free market healthcare system because if they don't receive treatment, then they're just going to die. And he said something to the effect of, well, I just think that capitalism promotes innovation and freedom in the medical sector. And I remember thinking, perhaps something that everyone who's been offered a mic at Charlie's events has thought, wow, I'm not really arguing with a person, am I? Is this really what this is? A machine that's supposed to go round and round in circles? An endless ideological performance? It wasn't worth any more breath, to be honest. So I said, thank you, and let the next person ask a question. According to reports from the Brown newspaper and the Providence Journal that night, Charlie's night at Brown was something of a shit show.
During the Q&A, Kirk avoided answering questions by posing another question, or by signaling his staff to move the mic to the next person, Costa said. Someone in the crowd called out, "Show us the same respect we're showing you by listening without interrupting."
And truly, really, us students wanted to hear what he had to say. Charlie's events were never genuine efforts to challenge students' beliefs or an authentic engagement with ideas. And well, I guess that's kind of obvious, but if there was ever any doubt, this event at Brown, where Charlie finally decided to take a chance at arguing with some of the most academically gifted students in the country, told me everything I needed to know. We were just guinea pigs to him, a test to see whether or not he could actually take the heat. And in the end, he couldn't. And there was probably a part of him that knew this. That's why there weren't cameras. That's why there's barely any evidence that this night even happened. Although I did manage to sneak this shitty recording of him walking off stage. Charlie never spoke at an elite college for years until near the end of his life, when he visited Oxford and Cambridge. You'd think that 6 years later something would have improved, right? We may live in a post-truth world in part thanks to people like Charlie, but even if truth may never be the same again, lies are always lies.
This doesn't mean that speech is useless. What speech can do is make social conflicts intelligible. Speech can help us understand each other and make ourselves understood. That's a key part of democracy. But if all you're doing is unloading on woke, then you're just laundering your group's interests through the performance of democratic deliberation. Kirk never wanted to facilitate good faith debate between diverse thinkers. Instead, he wanted to push the interests of a particular white conservative identity. My evidence? Well, for one, Turning Point USA is an organization that's full of racists. From the top to the bottom. The former TPUSA National Field Director Crystal Clanton once wrote in a text message to another employee stating, and I do apologize for repeating this, "I hate black people like fuck them all, I hate blacks." End of story. Well, I wonder what that could mean. What else did TPUSA do to encourage open debate on college campuses? Fixed elections. According to several reports, Republican donors funneled stupid amounts of money into university elections through TPUSA, basically rigging student governments across America by aggressively outspending competition. These free speech warriors also started the Professor Watch List, where any professor critical of the conservative agenda was put on a big public list where they were then targeted for harassment. This is an organization that from its founding has represented the interests of a small minority of elites and the prejudices that benefit them. Despite this, Kirk, at least in his public life, has held firmly onto free market, idealistic American principles, at least at first.
America's just a placeholder for timeless ideas.
Even as his organization represented the interests of specific dominant groups, around this time in 2019, it still, on the surface, professed idealistic universal principles. This wasn't a contradiction unique to TPUSA. It is the contradiction at the heart of 21st century conservatism. How did they reconcile the facade of their colorblind free market principles with the reality of who these principles really benefit? This is the question that broke the right wing, and it all started with this guy. When Trump first rose to power, far-right identitarian groups felt more emboldened than ever, to the point where even self-proclaimed Nazis began showing their faces in public without shame. But when Trump actually took office in 2017 and started implementing policies, far-right extremists weren't very pleased. Why wasn't he ushering the Christian nationalist racial utopia they had been hoping for? In fact, Trump wasn't doing much of anything. His only major legislative feat was cutting taxes for the rich. Globo homo was still intact. Charlie Kirk, being a generic neoliberal conservative at the time, didn't see much of a problem with Trump's actions. In fact, he was a Trump fanatic. This got Charlie in trouble with the far right. As the editor of one white nationalist publication wrote,
"We want Donald Trump to do what he said he was going to do. Kirk and all of these other shills have attached themselves to Trump to push a big money corporatist, homosexualist, Zionist, globalist agenda."
At some point, the online world spilled into real life. Fans of the far-right streamer Nick Fuentes, also known as Groypers, crashed Charlie's 2019 tour with explicitly racist questions and other edgelord bait.
How does anal sex help us win the culture war?
Charlie wasn't happy.
You're bringing some very charged language. I'm going to try to calm down the temperature in the room.
At this time, Charlie wasn't a fan of identitarianism, whether from woke identity groups or from white supremacists. That doesn't mean that his ideas didn't actively hurt minorities, but there's a reason that Charlie worked very hard to deny that fact. He believed in a world where ideas, speech, and policies could be separated from the material conflicts that create them. He, at the time, truly believed that America was just an idea, and only an idea, and ideas are for everyone, right?
I find that to be a racist question. I reject the idea behind it. The insinuation of your question is that somehow race and ideology are intertwined together.
But this is stupid because race and ideology are very obviously intertwined. What do you think racism is? Race itself is an ideology of difference and identity. It is a social, political, and symbolic way of organizing the world, otherwise known as an ideology. Charlie didn't understand this because, according to him, speech takes care of our conflicts and markets take care of our speech. At some point, though, the reality sets in. When you watch videos of Charlie dealing with the herd of racist white boys trying to challenge him, rapidly firing off their rehearsed anti-Semitic talking points, I'm reminded of the stories of Charlie as a young boy, debating his teachers, because maybe speech isn't an effective way of dealing with social conflict. Maybe markets aren't good at picking the best ideas. Maybe the public sphere is the site of conflict. It is where conflicts thrive. It is where new ones are generated and where old ones are re-articulated. Speech makes our conflicts understandable by translating these conflicts into ideas, ideologies, identities. But the worst thing we can do is cede collective control over speech to the dynamics of a market. When those gay-ass Greeks were inventing democracy, they understood that political speech must act as a pact between the speaker and the people. The people have the right to take the right of speech away, to decide when speech is being manipulated, to decide when speech violates ethics, and to decide when speech threatens democracy. This doesn't mean that a democratic society shouldn't have speech that's challenging, subversive, radical, world-shattering. It means that speech has to be grounded in some democratic ethic. If we submit speech to the logic of a free market, then you're basically killing the possibility of ethical speech. It's the death of democratic accountability, civic life, and truth-telling itself. Markets obfuscate the reality of conflicts. They make accountability obsolete. They make ethics impossible. Charlie Kirk preached that unrestrained speech would bring about peaceful resolution to conflict and struggle as he sits in front of a giant banner that says culture war. Charlie was in the business of conflict, not solving it. And perhaps at one point he genuinely believed in America, the idea, the creed, the principles, but at some point he also realized that ideas only get you so far. There was a culture war going on, and he intended on winning.
On May 25, 2020, Minneapolis police officer Derek Chauvin murdered George Floyd after responding to a report that Floyd had used a counterfeit $20 bill. Multiple bystanders filmed the killing. Nearly 9 minutes of Chauvin kneeling on Floyd's neck as he pleaded for air, pleaded for his mother, then went silent.
When the footage and information about the case spread online, it ignited the largest protest movement in American history. Tens of millions of Americans took to the streets during the summer of 2020 under the banner of Black Lives Matter, a movement that had existed for years but now exploded into a full-scale racial reckoning amid pandemic, economic collapse, and social unrest. A lot of people fondly or pejoratively remember this time as peak woke, and in some ways that's true. Language around race became more systemic, more historical, and it opened the door for more sophisticated policy approaches, but it was only temporary. This language was immediately absorbed by corporations and institutions, filtered through HR departments, and folded into the same liberal managerial culture that manages everything else shittily. We know the story. DEI became less about political struggle and material change, and more about the regulation of speech, behavior, and tone. But conservatives blew it all out of proportion. Out of this moment came the Republican boogeyman we're stuck with today: wokeness. Charlie Kirk and his fellow conservatives seized the opportunity to invent a new moral panic.
Here's the best way I can describe CRT to you. It's calling everything you don't like racist until you control it.
Now, obviously, this is a bad faith interpretation, but it's doing something rhetorically important. This was the groundwork for a dramatic change in conservative thought. It was at this moment in 2020, at the dawn of one of America's darkest chapters, that something in the conservative imaginary started to shift. Which brings us back to the question: what does it mean to be an American? Is America an idea or a people? Is America good? Is it worth conserving? Around this time, Charlie Kirk and other conservatives began to place these questions at the center of their thought. At first, it was indirect, just the subtext of the story they were about to tell. It began with a central conflict. America is under attack.
American tradition is now being put on the ropes by an unexpected villain.
Who is that villain? Woke.
We need to defeat this woke industrial complex forcibly and quickly, because that will destroy us all. It will destroy us from within quicker than any sort of domestic enemy ever could.
But according to Charlie, what is woke? What do they want?
How did we get to the place that we are in?
Charlie tells us a little story.
Well, put simply, post-1960s liberalism, they realized that to undermine the American nation, conflict is necessary to overflow the nation, not speech. Pitting people against each other. This is a doctrine of conflict politics.
He tells us of an insidious group from the 1960s, radicals who tainted discourse with conflict politics.
Which is rich against poor, man against woman.
And what was their target?
This idea of Western society is actually at the root of their critique.
And now, he says, these anti-Western radicals have taken over our institutions in a fundamental way.
No, it's the majority of people that run the colleges, that run our government, that run the tech companies.
Ah, yes, billionaires, notoriously the class of left-wing anti-racist radicals. But as silly as Charlie's story is, does he not notice the performative contradiction here? For someone who seems to think that conflict politics is at the root of all of our problems, this sure sounds like conflict politics. Are secret left-wing radicals really the ones undermining our institutions through division? Or might the problem be people like Charlie, the people actually funded by billionaire donors, literally crafting a conflict narrative before our eyes to justify their own political ends? But no, Charlie says that Democrats are the anti-American party. Which is weird because Republicans seem to be the ones who keep saying that America has fallen.
But America is now rapidly becoming an unsafe and, dare I say, more unpleasant place to live.
Meanwhile, Democrats naively preach about American goodness.
America is pretty darn great right now. America's making strides right now.
No, but Charlie is the one who's a patriot, right? Charlie is the one who truly loves America, despite the fact that he is the one arguing that every American institution is beyond saving.
Like, how do you revitalize an institution that's dominated by people who are aiming in the wrong direction?
They're irredeemable.
What is it that he wants to conserve? What is it that he wants to save? Because it's clearly not America.
That America as we know it will shatter into a million different pieces.
And that's why the America question is now central to the conservative imaginary.
The defining issue of the year of our Lord 2025, going into 2026, 2027, on the American right is one that we are totally unprepared for, which is what is in American.
Which brings us to the Great American Horseshoe.
Horseshoes are a classic trope in political analysis. It's the idea that extremists on the far left and far right share more in common with each other than with the political center. But the Great American Horseshoe isn't a horseshoe that actually represents reality. It's a representation of how the contemporary right experiences reality, a window into the mind of today's conservatives. Let's break it down. The horseshoe imagines how different groups answer the question, what is America? On one end, we have the far left's answer, not necessarily what leftists would actually answer, but how conservatives perceive how leftists would answer. Are you with me? On the other end, we have the far right's answer. Since this horseshoe represents the right wing's point of view, this would be their actual position. In the middle, we have the liberal view, which can lean left or right. I'd also argue that this is generally the liberal position in reality. Let's start with the libs in the middle. They argue, like Charlie Kirk once did in 2019, that America is an idea. It's the Constitution, it's freedom, liberty, and justice for all. These days, on the right wing, this way of thinking is going out of fashion.
One of the things that you hear people say, even on our side, that you hear people say, is that America is the first creedal nation. Okay? America is an idea.
The right wing pushes back.
But America is not just an idea. It is a group of people with a common history and a common future.
Today's right wing argues that, yeah, America is a people. America does represent the interests of a particular group. And that's good, actually. Now, how do conservatives imagine the left would answer? According to the right, the far left believes that America fundamentally represents an oppressor class, basically white Christian men.
White English-speaking Christian males were taught that they were part of an oppressor class and must atone for their racial discretion.
The insistence that what you see in Western culture is the consequence of a male-dominated, oppressive, self-serving society.
This means the system was set up for the benefit of white people.
They pretend that nobody else exists and that everything revolves around white people.
This caricature of the left is a direct mirror of the right-wing position. The left side of this horseshoe argues that America is a people, and that's bad, actually. The new right wing is in a battle over American peoplehood. They say that America is a people. They believe that the left's main goal is in destroying that people. Let's for now put aside the question of whether this is actually what leftism is about. This perceived conflict is the central conceit of American fascism today. The assertion that America is a people, a historically, culturally, and ethnically specific people, and that people is in opposition to a perceived enemy, the far left and other anti-Western forces.
It will destroy the country.
The right is fighting a defensive civilizational battle against an existential enemy. This is the right wing's 21st century rebellion against the 20th century, against globalism, neoliberalism, and pluralism.
National conservatism is a revolt against this fundamentally post-American ruling class. This revolt from the right is a revolt from the right, but also a revolt within the right. For too long, conservatives were content to serve as the right wing of the regime. They too waged foreign wars in the name of global liberalism and democracy. They too rewrote our trade policies in service of the interests of global capital.
This isn't a fringe ideology or a freaky mutation of conservative thought. This is American conservatism's natural conclusion, a reckoning with what conservatism has always acted upon even as it denied itself. The Great American Horseshoe is American conservatism regaining an awareness of the fact that it has always represented one particular side of a social struggle.
This helps us make sense of conservatism's great paradoxes. Like, isn't it weird how old school conservatives wanted to ban gay marriage despite hating big government? Or how they claim to be pro-life, but also cut welfare programs that feed children? Well, it's because these people don't have principles, silly. Conservatives, at least the ones actually involved in political decision-making, have always been primarily concerned with protecting the interests of a specific social class and the hierarchies that benefit those classes. The free market is actually pretty good at maintaining social hierarchies through economic inequality. So, in the 20th century, social conservatives strategically partnered with economic conservatives so that they could both get the outcomes that they wanted. Economic conservatives offered to secure social conservatives the money and power that they wanted, and social conservatives offered economic conservatives a popular culture war narrative. As dark money conservative donor David Koch said in 2014,
I'm a conservative on economic matters, and I'm a social liberal.
But conservative candidates you support, many of them, do not have those views.
Well, that's their problem.
All he cares about is protecting the interests of a dominant group.
I'm really focused intensely on economic and fiscal issues.
Here's the thing, though. A truly free market doesn't always preserve old hierarchies. Its primary aim is growth, self-reproduction, iteration. It doesn't care about your community, your church, your hometown. It will build a McDonald's wherever it wants. While capitalist markets have historically preserved social hierarchies like racism and sexism, these capitalist markets would just as easily destroy them. If traditional ideas suddenly become incompatible with the free market, the market will make a correction. The free market does not care. Billionaire social conservative donors like the Hanleys once believed that capitalism's indifference to hierarchy could be redirected in their favor. But as diversity and non-traditional interests became more popular among consumers, the market adapted. And now that the free market has come to bite conservatism in its own ass, they're throwing a tantrum.
The lie of the West, of modernity, the last 30 years, is that we're going to have you live and let live, and there will be no moral standard. That itself is a moral standard, and it's a really bad one.
Conservatives have come to re-examine themselves, and Charlie Kirk is the prime example. Once upon a time, Charlie Kirk was an unironic neoliberal shill.
Neoliberalism has lifted billions of people out of poverty in Southeast Asia, all over the world.
But later in his life, he abandoned the neoliberal framework he once worshipped.
Kind of Western government collusion that's going to keep the failed project of neoliberalism going.
We believe neoliberalism has been a failed experiment in the modern era.
Because you're bashing neoliberalism, right? Which I totally agree with.
Why? Because it's not convenient anymore. This helps explain a lot. The rise of racialized populism, right-wing authoritarianism, Christian nationalism, all of these seemingly new trends are simply manifestations of something conservatism has always been, the expression of a dominant group's social interests. Do not be fooled by today's right-wing reappropriation of the language of social struggle. These are not populists. The rise of fascism is conservatism's rediscovery of its own truth. If we want to understand why the Republican Party has changed, or I guess not changed, but become more of itself, we have to understand how Charlie changed. Around 2020, as social struggle became central to conservative politics, Kirk underwent a series of profound political changes.
2020 was peak woke, where I was starting to understand that this was a manifestation of a spiritual struggle.
Charlie was always deeply religious, but early in his career, he insisted on keeping religion and politics separate.
Christian conservatives fell for a trap that they really should have rejected. But I think where the line was crossed is in the 60s and 70s and 80s, where we tried to impose those beliefs through government policy.
He unambiguously defended the separation of church and state.
We do have a separation of church and state, and we should support that.
Which makes sense. At the time, he was a classical liberal.
We're not a theocracy. We never have been.
He believed religion and politics represented two fundamentally different spheres of life. But later in his career, Charlie made some new friends. He started hanging with folks like Rob McCoy, a prominent Christian nationalist pastor who sees the Christian church as a political force. McCoy is an advocate of the Seven Mountains Mandate, an extremist movement that believes Christians are commanded to seize control over all spheres of American society. This includes spheres like religion, obviously, but also education, family, media, arts, entertainment, business, and government. They, without exaggeration, seek to establish a Christian theocracy ruled by biblical principles.
We should always try to impact everything for God's purpose. Music, arts, entertainment, business, finance, and yes, even government and civic life.
By 2020, Charlie Kirk had fully embraced the Seven Mountains Mandate and fused it with MAGA doctrine.
If the church does not take its proper role, then the country and the republic will be gone as we know it.
He framed Trump as a providential figure, uniquely positioned to restore Christian dominance.
Finally, we have a president that understands the seven mountains of cultural influence.
This shift ended up being good for business. Kirk's turn towards Christian nationalism brought in tens of millions of dollars in donations to TPUSA, aligning Kirk's financial incentives with his religious activism. By then, he had completely abandoned the liberal secular principles he once professed.
Separation of church and state. First of all, that's not in the US Constitution.
Come on, Charlie, it's the First Amendment of the Constitution. Congress shall make no law respecting an establishment of religion or prohibiting the free exercise thereof. Do you think that's just a suggestion? What do you think founding father John Adams meant when he wrote, "The government of the United States of America is not in any sense founded on the Christian religion"? I don't know. It's one thing to argue that Christianity is central to American culture, or that Christianity influenced the founding fathers, all of which are defensible claims. But no, Charlie argued that America is and always has been a nation for Christians by Christians.
56 of the original signers of the Declaration were Bible-believing, church-attending Christians. So common law is inherited from Blackstone, who was Christian. Common law is an outgrowth of the scriptures. So let's go to 3 principles of common law. Presumption of innocence, due process, injury of your peers. All 3 are biblical principles. And all wrapped into the ultimate biblical principle that you shall not favor justice if you are rich or poor, which is Leviticus 19, right before the most famous part of Leviticus 19.
My apologies to anyone who knows anything about philosophy or history, as you've surely lost your will to live by now. But we know it doesn't matter because this isn't about truth. He's here to sell a narrative about an America in crisis, about a country he believes will die if it loses the particularity of its people.
One of the reasons we're living through a constitutional crisis is that we no longer have a Christian nation, but we have a Christian form of government, and they're incompatible. So you cannot have liberty if you do not have a Christian population.
This is an argument that feels familiar these days. It follows a classic fascist structure. It starts with naming the identity they seek to protect. Whatever particular religion, ethnicity, family structure, whatever. Then they invent a mythic past that ties this identity to national origins. And finally, they frame the present as an emergency that justifies extraordinary action. These aren't Charlie's original thoughts. No, he never had much of those. Someone taught these arguments to him. They gave him these ideas. At the time he started repeating them, Charlie was making some new friends. Behind the scenes, Kirk and other prominent right-wing figures were being mentored by professional ideologues affiliated with a place called the Claremont Institute. Here in this relatively unassuming office center next to a Domino's lies the intellectual headquarters of American fascism. They taught Charlie everything he needed to know. On paper, the Claremont Institute is just another right-wing conservative think tank. But according to Charlie,
It's the intellectual home of the new right.
Claremont is much more than just a think tank. It is the philosophical core of American fascism today. Not that American fascists are intellectually serious in any way, but Claremont's job is in making fascism appear intellectually serious. They make authoritarianism feel historically grounded, morally urgent, and intellectually legitimate. They groom influential figures on the right by teaching them this tight narrative of American decline.
You know, a lot of people don't even know about the Claremont Institute. Like, they have no idea what the Claremont Institute is, and those who know, they know, right?
That's why I'm here.
Claremont has deep ties to Republican power. They've worked with Ron DeSantis, Clarence Thomas, J.D. Vance, tons of Trump administration officials, and a long list of media figures including Christopher Rufo, Michael Knowles, Ben Shapiro, Laura Ingraham, Mark Levin. Guys, the list goes on. And yes, of course, it includes Charlie Kirk. So what's going on with these Claremonters? When Trump first became popular, people believed that he was going to be some temporary blip in world history, that things would eventually get back to normal, that soon enough neoliberalism would be back on schedule to end history. But the Claremont Institute was different. Claremont planted its flag firmly in the Trump camp. They argued that Trump was a symptom of a profound crisis, and perhaps the only cure to that crisis. That argument formally crystallized in an essay published in one of the Claremont Institute's publications, The Flight 93 Election by Michael Anton. The infamous essay frames the 2016 race as a hijacked plane on 9/11 barreling towards destruction.
If you don't try, death is certain. To compound the metaphor, a Hillary Clinton presidency is Russian roulette with a semi-auto. With Trump, at least you can spin the cylinder and take your chances.
The essay went viral, an early sign of the political future to come. And when Trump won the election, Trump rewarded the Claremont Institute for its early loyalty. Michael Anton ended up working for the first Trump administration and remains a MAGA figurehead to this day.
I see Michael Anton back there. He's the most brilliant.
Since then, Claremont's main purpose has been in providing the Trump administration and Trump's actions with a philosophical grounding. It sounds trivial, but this type of work plays an important part in normalizing fascism. What is the Claremont Institute's overall angle? They themselves say that
the mission of the Claremont Institute is to restore the principles of the American founding to their rightful, preeminent authority in our national life. Those principles include the foundational doctrines of natural rights and natural law found in the Declaration of Independence, the ingenious political science of the Constitution, and the popular constitutionalism or reverence necessary for the maintenance of free government.
Sounds kind of vague. And that's by design. They start from a vague philosophical framework that allows them to justify any policy position they want. Now, we can spend all day showing how tons of Claremont affiliates are fascists or white supremacists, or how they endorse horrific authoritarian policies, and how they have a direct line to the Trump administration, which is all true. But that's not the story that I'm here to tell. That to me feels more like I'm running some sort of freaky carnival sideshow. Wow, look at how unapologetically evil all these people are. Let's live out together. No. Let's do something a little different this time. We're here to understand how and why Charlie Kirk believed the things he believed and why his beliefs changed over time. Part of that requires trying to genuinely understand the Claremont Institute and its profound impact on Kirk's political strategy. Even though American fascism has the intellectual depth of an armpit, it's an armpit worth smelling. Do we need deodorant or a shower? When Charlie Kirk drove down that tree-lined suburban street, past the Yoshinoya, past the Domino's, and walked through the doors of the Claremont Institute to start his Lincoln Fellowship in 2021, they were about to teach him a view of the world that would change his entire life. What Charlie learned at the Claremont Institute was the final nail in the coffin in his transformation from American idealist to American fascist. It is perhaps the most dangerous, most consequential lesson plan in the history of contemporary American politics. And I'm about to give it.
In 1979, four chuds, inspired by their professor Harry V. Jaffa, founded the Claremont Institute in the hopes of preserving his intellectual legacy. Jaffa was an influential conservative political thinker in the 1950s and 60s, known for producing an American version of his own favorite philosopher, Leo Strauss. To understand Claremont and the New Right, we have to understand Strauss. Is reading conservative philosophy a better use of time than jumping in front of a moving train? Well, let's find out. Leo Strauss was a German-American philosopher active in the middle of the 20th century. Ultimately, he was a critic of modernity. He argued that modern values offer no moral or spiritual direction, leading to a type of corrosive nihilism unsustainable in any society. And yeah, whatever. He's not the first or last person to propose the idea that modernity makes us empty and sad, but Strauss was nice enough to offer something of a solution. According to him, the answer to the crisis of modernity lies in classical philosophy, particularly Western classical philosophy. Is this about to be racist? Let's put a pin in that. According to Strauss, Western civilization is great because it is based on a fundamental conflict within itself, the struggle between two types of civilizational wisdoms, Athens and Jerusalem, between philosophical and biblical wisdom, between reason and revelation. On the one hand, the tradition of Athens, rationality, skepticism, observation. On the other hand, Jerusalem, faith, reverence, revelation. So, that's a nice story, Leo, but whether this is a historically or philosophically accurate portrayal of these respective cultures is up to debate. And it is a little weird to just brush aside the influence of Islam on Western culture and classical philosophy, which makes you wonder, is this just Western chauvinism dressed up in philosophical language? Good question. This is part of what makes Strauss so appealing. Like, wouldn't it just be easier if we could find the solution to complex problems in something old and familiar? Something known, yet far away enough to still be mysterious? Let's put a pin in that.
For now, let's think of Strauss's dichotomy here more as two different archetypes of wisdom rather than actual historical things. Rational observation and dedicated faith both have their place in the pursuit of truth. Doesn't all reason to some extent require faith in an external world? A belief in causes and effects? Doesn't all faith require a reasoned evaluation of your practices and in your object of faith? This is a tension that is elegant and interesting. As Strauss saw it, this contrast is inherent to truth and thought itself.
Philosophy and Bible are the alternatives or the antagonists in the drama of the human soul. Each of the two antagonists claims to know or to hold the truth, the decisive truth, the truth regarding the right way of life.
But we have to be careful here because Strauss is making an argument about Western greatness here, which, now I'm just in a fucking minefield, aren't I? Let's just say that we can appreciate what's uniquely valuable about Socrates and Plato and Jesus and rabbinical wisdom and Roman architecture without being weird and racist about it. Can you? But on the conversation of wisdom, Strauss believed that reason and revelation were fundamentally incompatible. You either live your life in the pursuit of knowledge of the good, or you dedicate your life to what you already believe is self-evidently good. You can't have it both ways. This incompatibility isn't necessarily bad, though. Conflict isn't always destructive. It can be generative, too. But not all conflicts can be resolved. And maybe not all conflicts should be. Harry V. Jaffa, the person whom the Claremont Institute is essentially dedicated to, was a Straussian. And even after reading all of Strauss's warnings that, no, you cannot synthesize Athens and Jerusalem, they're incompatible, it's a lost cause, don't do it, stop it.
The whole history of the West shows us one attempt after another to achieve a synthesis. But all these syntheses, as far as they could claim to be so, have broken down. The harmony is impossible.
After all of that, Jaffa said, nah. Sorry, Strauss. According to Dr. Jaffa, the West actually has synthesized the conflict between Athens and Jerusalem. And that synthesis is called America.
The unprecedented character of the American founding is that it provided for the coexistence of the claims of reason and of revelation in all their forms, without requiring or permitting any political decisions concerning them. It refused to make unassisted human reason the arbiter of the claims of revelation, and it refused to make revelation the judge of the claims of reason. It is the first regime in Western civilization to do this, and for that reason it is, in its principles or speech, leaving aside the question of its practice or deeds, the best regime.
Surely this time we've done it, Leo. For real this time. In essence, Jaffa packaged American exceptionalism into a new political philosophy. It turned America into a quasi-metaphysical truth, thus providing the potential justification for whatever horrific thing America has done, can do, or will do. Jaffa, his students, and other American Straussians have their fingers all over American conservative thought. They helped Bill Buckley build his National Review. They built the Claremont Institute. They helped George W. Bush kill millions of people. They helped get Trump into the White House, and they made Charlie Kirk into the person he was. What does it mean to govern like a Straussian? Well, as it turns out, Straussians are pretty suspicious of democracy and popular sovereignty. One of Strauss's problematic faves, Plato, once raised the question of whether effective political governance might require politicians to lie sometimes. Scholars have dubbed this idea the noble lie. The people don't always know what's best for them, so sometimes maybe you gotta make shit up, right?
Now, Strauss had a complicated view of noble lies, or rather, he had a complicated and sneaky justification for them. He starts with a premise that is undeniably true.
Because in a way, aren't all governments built on lies? Like, fundamentally, there is nothing that ties citizens together other than the pure chance of being born at a certain place and a certain time. That's why countries invent national myths, to invent solidarity among citizens. But who invents these myths according to Straussians? Who should invent these myths?
These are legitimate questions, but Straussians offer an answer that leads us down a dangerous path.
According to Straussians, only the elite and wise could ever construct noble lies. Lies so noble that they overcome the inherent myth of nationhood. Strauss didn't wholesale argue that elites should get to lie with reckless abandon, but he didn't exactly say they shouldn't lie. The truly wise would know when and how to lie, and surely they'll know how to construct lies so good that they promote flourishing society. Surely. And who are the truly wise? Oh, well, Straussians, of course. But the thing about Straussians is that they often depart so greatly from Strauss's own thought that the label Straussian starts to become less of a philosophical commitment and more of the name of an elitist club. As political scientist Ann Norton writes,
"There is the story of the Straussians, which is properly two stories, the story of the philosophical lineage of Leo Strauss and the story of a set of students taking that name, regarded by others and themselves as a chosen set of initiates into a hidden teaching."
To be a Straussian, as the individuals at the Claremont Institute are, is not to actually care about the integrity of Strauss's philosophy. American Straussianism is simply the name of a political strategy. It is the name a group of elitists have given to the idea of political elitism itself. Now, Jaffa had similar ideas to Strauss on noble lies. Neither of them thought that governments should be dominated by something as unstable as one individual person's wisdom or judgment. That easily leads to tyranny. But leaders shouldn't be too truthful either. No. Only the wise can handle the esoteric knowledge required to govern. Only the wise would know when to make the final call. According to Jaffa,
the appeal to the right of wisdom is more likely than not to result in tyranny. The essence of the political problem is to combine the necessity for wisdom with the necessity for consent.
The wise can't just do whatever they want, they also have to genuinely convince people of their way. But don't we see a problem here? Who shall decide the wise? Who shall decide the limits on the wise? The other wise? Don't we need standards? Otherwise, the other wise might say otherwise. Will all of this just be self-evident? This Straussian tradition is alive and well in today's Republican Party. The Claremont Institute and its influential Republican associates see themselves as divinely inspired and endlessly wise elites tasked with producing the noble lies that'll restore America back to its civilizational greatness.
The mission of the Claremont Institute is to save Western civilization.
Do you think these elites are actually wise? Or are they just rich? Because as it turns out, the Claremont Institute is funded by the same network of dark money conservative billionaire donors we've been talking about this entire video. Koch-backed foundations, oil tycoons, tax-dodging elites. It's the same people, the same story, the same small minority of rich people with unpopular and undemocratic ideas who entrust professional pundits with selling their propaganda. And what's even worse is that they're just such losers.
This Claremont Institute podcast episode on Jaffa is the perfect representation of Claremont's civilizational wisdom. Our hosts, two dudes who have made their midlife crisis into America's problem, one of whom is Michael Anton, Mr. Flight 93 election himself, both of them gushing over their philosophy husband, which is fine. I'd let Pierre Bourdieu teach me about masculine domination any day. But the intellectual circle jerk before us,
as the kids say, based,
is obviously a pathetic attempt from a couple of insipid fascists desperately clinging on to any last bit of relevance by throwing around 4chan internet slang.
Jaffa was pretty based. They think that they're based. You can't be based. Based.
All to score points with basement-dwelling incels. Meanwhile, half of the comment section is anti-Semitic dog whistles rebuking Jaffa for being Jewish. Wow, it really is the intellectual home of the new right.
Claremont fashions itself as America and Western civilization's last great defense against anti-American forces. They train their right-wing proteges to repeat this narrative endlessly, which is exactly what Charlie did.
You mean Western civilization? The place where reason and revelation met into one?
Wonder where he got that from.
Well, the West is the best blend of reason and revelation. As Harry Jaffa would say, it's the blend of the ideas of Athens and Jerusalem.
Claremont taught Charlie that America is the West's greatest achievement, a sacred synthesis of reason and faith, and that now this great synthesis is under attack from an insidious leftist insurgency.
The Democratic Party has been taken over by its radical wing.
Well, if Claremont says that America is cooked, according to them, the wise elites have to rise up to save it. They seek a mythic leader, one who can gracefully deliver the noble lies that will save the republic.
Trump gives us a chance to preserve the American way of life. Biden likely will be party to its destruction.
Oh, okay, it's up to Trump and the Republicans to save America, to restore its peoplehood, its civilizational progeny. If institutions are compromised, well, I guess they have to fall.
They're irredeemable.
The people must be cleansed. Democracy must be temporarily paused.
I'm not a fan of democracy.
Everything must be burned, and in the ashes, the right will fashion a new regime. Here we see Christian nationalism, Straussian elitism, and Trumpism collapsing into the same project. American fascism. People like Charlie Kirk learned to stop caring about democracy and to start preparing for its replacement. But surely that's just the worst case scenario, right? Surely their plan is still just a theory, just an inkling of an idea. Surely there's still time, right? The 2020 election was not a normal election. It was not your typical battle over ideas or policy or the usual shit-slinging we've come to expect from American politics. By the time the 2020 election rolled around, MAGA conservatives were pretty much done with liberal democracy, and Charlie Kirk was one of them. Republicans were talking about existential struggle. And if we're talking about existential struggle, then who gives a shit about democratic institutions, right? Don't take my word for it. Here's how the Claremont Institute framed it.
The coming election is not about personalities. It's not about policies either. What the election is about is the character of America.
According to Republicans, Democrats are the ones calling for systemic collapse.
Biden now frequently talks about systemic racism. If racism is systemic, then the system must be overturned. This conclusion seems inescapable to me.
Of course, we know Joe Biden and the Democratic Party didn't want to overturn the system. My evidence? Well, he was president and it didn't happen. The only mainstream political party in the US calling for the destruction of institutions are the Republicans.
The country we love has slipped away and we have to get it back.
But it doesn't matter. Noble lie, right? As Charlie Kirk wrote in his 2020 book, The MAGA Doctrine, to the extent that Trump is the defender and advocate of the United States, he functions as a vessel for Western civilization, which is humanity's best hope of living better than our distant ancestors. The Claremont Institute understood that if they could make the case that literally all of civilization is on the line, then they could justify anything, even if it meant denying democracy itself. Throughout the 2020 election cycle, Trump teased his unwillingness to concede in any circumstance, and he accused Democrats of planning to steal the election. The stage was set. Then came the election. Biden wins the 2020 election, legitimately. Almost immediately, Trump challenges the results.
This is a fraud on the American public. Frankly, we did win this election.
First, deny, deny, deny. Confuse the system, flood it with accusations, lawsuits, anything to stall the election. And Trump wasn't going into this alone. Behind him was a plan, a scheme masterminded by none other than senior board member of the Claremont Institute, John Eastman. Yep, the Claremont Institute did this too. John had a cute idea, essentially the legal equivalent of throwing shit at the wall. I cannot overstate how insane and illegal their plan was. Probably as illegal as the Trantifa headquarters me and my buddy are building. Let's actually pull up the diagram. To understand why Trump's plan was mind-bendingly illegal, it helps to understand a bit about American elections, which I know I'd also rather submerge myself in corrosive acid.
Americans have this complicated situationship with something called the Electoral College. Essentially, once the American people vote for the president, then a bunch of other people, called electors, do the actual voting on behalf of the states that they represent. Under normal circumstances, this all looks really stupid and boring. Each state certifies its election results, appoints its official slate of electors, those electors meet in December to cast their votes, those votes are sent to Congress, and then they're counted and certified. But apparently that's the myth of consensual democracy. Isn't there a boomer pedophile you forgot to ask? Donald Trump wasn't happy with the results of the election. Unfortunately, instead of killing himself, Trump decided to overturn the election. For this, he enlisted the help of the now disgraced lawyer, John Eastman. Divorced Indiana Jones came up with a fascinating legal theory based on a loophole overlooked by constitutional scholars for centuries: making shit up. In states where Biden unequivocally won, Trump's team would send fake votes and start arguing that the fake votes should be counted. That's not my description, by the way. That's literally a quote from an email written by Trump's team. He just wrote it down. To which another lawyer responded, "Alternative votes is probably a better term than fake votes." Smiley face emoji. Good thinking, Jack. The goal wasn't actually to prove that Trump won. They knew he didn't. The goal was to create enough confusion so that Mike Pence, as vice president, could claim that there was a dispute and either refuse to count certain states' votes or throw the election back to the House of Representatives. How do I know this? Because John Eastman wrote a memo documenting exactly how Trump plans to overthrow the election. Why do they keep writing this shit down? So, by the way, in case it wasn't clear, this was all illegal, and they knew it was illegal, and they kept sending emails saying they knew it was illegal. This doesn't even warrant being called a plot. This is literally just begging people to break the law for them. Like how Trump begged the governor of Georgia to just magically find the exact number of votes he needed to win.
I just want to find 11,780 votes. I only need 11,000 votes. Fellas, I need 11,000 votes. Give me a break. There's nothing wrong with saying that, that you've recalculated.
Oh, okay. So shouldn't these people be in jail?
Yeah, Trump and Eastman were repeatedly told that their scam was unethical, undemocratic, and illegal. Do you know what Eastman's justification was?
We are talking about whether we are going to, as a nation, completely repudiate every one of our founding principles, which is what the modern left wing, which is in control of the Democrat Party, believes. This is an existential threat to the very survivability, not just of our nation, but of the example that our nation, properly understood, provides to the world. That's the stakes. And Trump seems to understand that in a way a lot of Republican establishment types in Washington don't. But at some point, the abuses have become so intolerable that it's not only their right, but their duty to alter or abolish the existing government.
Yep, that's the Claremont Institute's insane philosophy, actively informing the president's coup attempt. You might be wondering, hey, existential threats to the nation kind of imply a lot of violence, right? If we start messing with democracies, isn't that when violence starts happening? If we start implying that elections are stolen even though they aren't, doesn't that provoke violent uprisings? Yeah, I know, right? And that's exactly what White House counsel Eric Hirschman told John Eastman when they were cooking this shit up.
You're going to turn around and tell 78 plus million people in this country that your theory is this is how you're going to invalidate their votes because you think the election was stolen. And I said, they're not going to tolerate that. He said, you're going to cause riots in the streets. And he said, words to the effect of there's been violence in the history of our country, Eric, to protect the democracy or protect the republic.
Oh. Trump, the Claremonters, and other maggots know that the inevitable outcome of their meddling with institutions and democracy would be explosive. And who was there cheering them on? Or actually not just cheering them on, but an active participant. Charlie Kirk. Charlie Kirk, once just a generic lib, but now cheering on the end of liberalism itself? Here's him doing just that with John Eastman on his podcast.
There is no escaping this. The only way is through, is defeat, is dismantling This is an out-of-control administrative state.
Charlie was there, cheering from the sidelines, little by little turning up the temperature, teetering off a ledge, playing with fire.
But we have no choice. They have left us with no choice. They have declared, quote unquote, the Roman Civil War, right? They crossed the Rubicon. So what are we gonna do? Just say, well, you know, we're better than this. Man, the system is cracking in front of our eyes.
Testing how far the rhetoric could go, all to justify his own actual coup. Until, well, imagine it's January 2021 for some reason, just for fun. Since November of 2020, the entire conservative media apparatus has been bombarding its followers with misinformation about the election. Recently, Trump had been promoting a rally on January 6th to stop the steal, or, in other words, say it with me, coup the government. Charlie Kirk's own Turning Point Action offered free bus transportation to the rally. Trump tells his followers it's going to be wild. Then the day comes, January 6th, 2021, the culmination of the election scheme. Behind the plan is a legal theory. Trump and Eastman wanted Mike Pence to question the slate of electors using Trump's false electors, with the hopes of sending the election over to Congress and eventually finally getting to, say it with me, coup the government. But they had to pressure Pence to actually go through with the plan. They needed a show of force. So Trump gathered a crowd of thousands of his followers in front of the Capitol on January 6th and inspired them with the language of peaceful democratic resistance.
We fight like hell, and if you don't fight like hell, you're not going to have a country anymore.
Oh, sorry, I didn't mean, I don't know how that got in there. Let's play the real clip.
Because you'll never take back our country with weakness. You have to show strength, and you have to be strong.
Sorry, my bad. Let's just skip to the part where he says there's gonna be a peaceful transfer of power.
We will never give up. We will never concede.
Well, yeah, I don't know what's happening.
Let's have trial by combat.
I think you get it. After feeding their supporters a narrative of existential threat for months, this is the moment that they've been waiting for. Charlie Kirk was live streaming that day. He, of course, knew what was gonna happen. They all knew what was gonna happen.
This week is gonna determine the future of our republic.
Naturally, he had his talking points loaded up. First, denounce the violence, obviously. Can't be held liable, right?
Folks have breached the Capitol's security parameters.
Which we do not support, and we completely denounce, and we think it's reprehensible.
In fact, deny that it's your side at all.
Okay? And by the way, we don't even know if these people are conservatives or Trump supporters or what. We don't know who these people are, okay?
Avoid responsibility, but also kind of justify it?
You can only insult and poke people in the eye for so long until they're going to burst. You go after someone's country and you don't give them an explanation and it feels stolen and it feels just fraudulent. How do you think people are going to react?
Ultimately, the election wasn't overturned on January 6th. But it did accomplish one thing. In the aftermath, it became totally politically acceptable to question elections, to question our democracy, actually question democracy itself. And violence? Well,
we fight like hell, and if you don't fight like hell, you're not going to have a country anymore.
And let's not forget this. It is Republicans who triggered the violent rhetoric. It is Republicans who first wanted to destroy our institutions, and they got pretty damn close. Give me a single quote from Joe Biden or a mainstream Democrat, not some random-ass TikToker, that is in any way, shape, or form as destructive as what Republicans have been getting away with for the past decade. And this wasn't an accident. This wasn't just the unfortunate and inevitable result of algorithms destroying our minds. No! Our violent and divisive political environment is the direct result of a small minority of elites so self-interested that they have poured billions of dollars into destroying this country. It is the result of the pundits who have stoked the flames of conflict in their direction.
This is how Satan plots and plans and deceives, and he has launched a virus, the woke mind virus, to destroy the greatest nation ever to exist in the history of the world. The demons of the woke.
This is the America that Charlie Kirk created. Conservatives are vultures who feed off American suffering. None of this was inevitable. This was the work of people like Charlie Kirk, the Claremont Institute, Donald Trump, and the billionaires behind them. And don't get me wrong, the neoliberal status quo wasn't working. Something needed to change. But the fact that it took the form of Trumpism, of Christian nationalism, right-wing populism, authoritarianism, those are the results of the deliberate efforts of a tiny group of parasites. So where do we go from here? After losing in 2020, conservative extremists began refining the big conclusion of their narrative. What does that look like? An unabashed pursuit of Christian hegemony, conservative domination, the destruction of social safety nets, and all power to the new vessel of Western civilization, Donald Trump and the new right.
When Trump won the election in 2024, Charlie Kirk was nearly brought to tears. For the past 3 years, TPUSA and other extremist groups had been refining their new vision of authoritarian governance, and this moment promised to bring it all together.
The plan was actually outlined in Project 2025, an effort on the part of dozens of conservative organizations to reimagine presidential power. The overall vision was: replace workers in government institutions with Trump loyalists. Remove as much friction as possible between the executive branch and all the constitutional checks on the president's power. Defund the administrative state, which apparently has been compromised by woke experts.
The everyday American is smarter than you give them credit for. The bad guys, the oligarchs, the Joe Biden group, they believe that the experts are smarter than we even mention, and that the everyday rank and file citizen is dumber than the experts. We believe the wisdom is in the people.
Which, of course, isn't a good faith critique of the limits of political bureaucracy. In reality, Kirk and conservatives today don't really want to decentralize power. They want to privatize power and sell it to their billionaire friends. Now, in 2025, this is exactly what the second Trump administration has done. Strategic budget cuts that weaken our democracy and threaten American lives, selling the military and surveillance apparatus to AI companies to target Americans, slashing public health spending and redirecting those funds to unregulated wellness billionaires, defund and privatize public education to replace it with Christian charter schools, cutting environmental regulations so that the American oil industry prevails. Let's pause for a moment to appreciate how comically evil this is. They've proposed $1 billion in cuts to federal disaster preparation and response, which directly puts the lives of millions of Americans at risk. As the climate crisis accelerates, these are the types of cuts that will have a lasting impact on American lives. I've actually partnered with Climate Power for this brief section of the video to help track what these cuts actually mean in real life.
Under the Trump administration, the Federal Emergency Management Agency, or FEMA, has lost about a quarter of its full-time staff, including important leadership roles like the head of the Storm Response Center. We've already seen delays in disaster response in places like Texas after deadly floods last year. That is, if disaster response comes at all. Trump is using FEMA aid as a political tool. He denied aid to Democratic states like Maryland and Washington without giving just cause. He threatened to withhold aid during the LA wildfires unless California gave him political concessions.
Hold funding to Los Angeles because of its sanctuary city policy?
I want to see two things in Los Angeles: voter ID, and I want to see the water be released.
This administration does not care about American lives. If Trump labels you a political enemy, your life does not matter to him. And, of course, Trump and his elite friends have found a way to financially benefit from all of this. Insurance companies are raising rates and canceling policies in areas facing extreme weather, at the same time that Trump threatens to withhold aid from these communities. So when disasters hit, vulnerable Americans find themselves without aid and without coverage. And why would Trump do anything to stop this when these same insurance companies have funneled millions of dollars into Trump's campaign? When, for him, disaster is a political opportunity. This country is being held hostage by billionaires and oligarchs who think American lives are just pawns in their political and financial games.
Right-wing elites are destroying all public checks on private power to secure power for themselves, the extremist billionaires that have funded their movement for decades, and anyone else who proves total loyalty. This is how fascism is built. Oh, but according to MAGA, cronyism is the only way to defeat woke or something. Anyways, here's why we need to repeal the Civil Rights Act.
Once a week we talk about why the Civil Rights Act was a mistake.
Oh, sorry, is this all undemocratic and technically illegal? Well, no worries. Charlie Kirk has an argument for why the United States isn't actually a democracy.
Myth number one, we are not a democracy, nor should we be. So we are a constitutional republic with a democrat mechanism.
Oh, okay. Wait, but isn't a republic a form of democracy?
A democracy inherently means the centralization of power. A constitutional republic respects the decentralization of power.
Right, exactly. We need to decentralize power. That's why Trump is sending the military into democratic cities.
Federalize Washington, D.C. Bring in the Marines. Call in the Insurrection Act. We need full military occupation of these cities until the crime desists.
How did Charlie get to this point? A man who used to believe in small government, liberty, freedom, decentralization, states' rights, all of that thrown out the window to defend a man who would send the military to coerce private citizens during peacetime? Are you serious?
Once we liberate D.C., you better believe it. Chicago, New York, Boston, Philadelphia, Portland, San Francisco, we got a big military.
Are you stupid? By the second Trump administration, Kirk had clearly abandoned all of his principles, and even quit his job to swallow Trump's loads full time. It seems the entire Republican Party abandoned its principles. At this point, one has to wonder what vision of America Charlie's conservatism is trying to conserve. If it isn't freedom or liberty or individual rights, then what? The answer lies in the great American horseshoe. They say America isn't an idea, but a people, and a people with enemies. What exactly is that enemy? Well, at first it was Antifa, illegal immigrants, trans people, far-left radicals, these minority groups who are easy to target. But post-January 6th, something shifted. American voters realized that actually they don't like it when their political leaders try to end democracy. But that's not a problem for conservatives because conservatives have simply stopped caring about being popular. Instead, what if the list of non-Americans just needs to grow? And since they've already built the argument for why enemies to America need to be destroyed at all costs, well then, any action is on the table. Do you think you're safe? Glenn Elmer's Claremont Director of Research wrote in March of 2021,
"Fewer are willing to take the next step and accept that most people living in the United States today, certainly more than half, are not Americans in any meaningful sense of the term, who may technically be citizens of the United States, but are no longer, if they ever were, Americans. They do not believe in, live by, or even like the principles, traditions, and ideals that until recently defined America as a nation and as a people. It is not obvious what we should call these citizen aliens, these non-American Americans, but they are something else."
According to conservatives, America is a people. But most people in America, even some citizens, even most citizens, aren't American.
That this is a distinctive moment in time with a distinctive place and a distinctive people. Our shared qualities, our heritage, our values, our manners and customs confer a special and indispensable advantage.
Who do you think conservatives refer to when they say America the people?
I think the people whose ancestors fought in the Civil War have a hell of a lot more claim over America than the people who say they don't belong.
Which side, JD? Which side? The ones who seceded?
What is in American?
Charlie answered this question in the past. He once said that America could be 90% Indian and still be America as long as the Indians were Christian.
If it was not even Indian Christian, is that still America? If it's Christian, yes.
Back in 2021, when someone asked Charlie a question about America being a white or European nation, he dismissed it as so obviously and inherently racist that he wouldn't even entertain the idea.
And so to reject your premise that, oh, how are we going to keep the white status of this? I find that to be a racist question. I reject the idea behind it. I do not think America should become a white ethno-state as a country. In fact, I think that is a fringe perspective.
But shortly before he died, Charlie walked it all back.
America is a people with shared histories and heritage, culture and values. Most of us still are Christians of European descent.
Decent?
I love this country, and I hate to see what mass migration is doing to it. It's not a racial thing.
Oh, well, okay, as long as it's not a racial thing.
If America is just a passport, then we are just the colony for Earth, a pile of wealth to loot. And that's how Somalis treat it.
Oh, okay.
Mamdani has a U.S. passport. Omar Fattah has a U.S. passport. Ilhan Omar is a member of Congress. Do you consider that to be a fellow American? If America is just a passport, then America is dead.
You know, the people Charlie named here are American citizens, public servants who were elected by their communities. And yet, Kirk at the time didn't think they were Americans because what, Charlie? What do you think, audience? Do you think he'd be saying this about Zoran Mamdani if his name was Kyle? How do you think this is going to end? Even after the violence of January 6th, Charlie Kirk would spend months teasing his viewers with a narrative of civil war, of looming violence, of America divided by a leftist specter he knew didn't really exist. Kirk was creating a monster, fully aware of where his rhetoric was leading.
Some of the emails that I'm getting that are calling for a civil war, where there's people that have emailed me right now and said that they're getting their weapons and they're going in the streets. We are on the road currently in our country right now to, societal dissolution.
In late 2021, a conservative audience member asked Charlie the inevitable question.
At this point, we're living under a corporate and medical fascism. This is tyranny. When do we get to use the guns?
Charlie knew that this was a completely predictable question. If conservatives like Charlie had been saying that institutions are irredeemable, that an internal enemy is tearing America apart, then how could Republican voters not reach the obvious conclusion?
Literally, where's the line? How many elections are they going to steal before we kill these people?
Though Kirk had no problem dismissing and borderline justifying violence at the Capitol, though he undoubtedly understood the consequences of his party's divisive fictions, Kirk knew that disorganized violence, in reality, was a suicidal strategy. For all of Kirk's stupid, reckless lies, he knew when to be careful.
No, stop. Hold on. Now I'm going to denounce that. I'm going to tell you why. Because you're playing into all their plans, and they're trying to make you do this. That's okay. Just hear me out. They are trying to provoke you and everyone here. They are trying to make you do something that will be violent, that will justify a takeover of your freedoms and liberties, the likes of which we have never seen. We have to be the ones that do not play into the violent aims and ambitions of the other side. They fear, let me say this very clearly, they fear us holding the line with self-control and discipline, taking over school board meetings. They're the ones that are willing to use federal force against us. And I know that people get fired up. We are living under fascism. We are living under this tyranny. But if you think for a second that they're not wanting you to all of a sudden get that next level, know that there's a deeper game at play. Understand the psychological warfare that's being played here. They're trying to animate you. They're trying to get you to do something that then justifies what they actually want to do.
The question is, are we going to take his advice? We all know how Charlie Kirk died, but a lot of people have lied about why. When I watched this clip of Charlie Kirk fighting to speak over his Republican audience, cheering on the threat of violence.
No, hold on. No, stop. Hold on.
Does it not become clear who in this country is responsible for turning up the temperature? Republicans created the moment of conflict we live in. They opened up the symbolic space that Democrats spent years trying to repress.
No matter how tough our politics gets, we need to see each other not as adversaries, but as fellow Americans. To join forces as Americans to stop shouting, lower the temperature.
And as much as Charlie tries to paint Democrats as the real fascists, it is of the utmost irony that he predicted with razor precision the Republican reaction to his death.
My great fellow Americans, I am filled with grief and anger at the heinous assassination of Charlie Kirk on a college campus in Utah.
Immediately after Kirk's passing, the right wing seized the moment to define the newly opened symbolic gap. At Charlie's memorial service, his friends and colleagues didn't offer the usual fond memories that happen at a normal memorial service. They turned the event into a political rally.
We are the storm.
and our enemies cannot comprehend our strength, our determination. Our lineage and our legacy hails back to Athens, to Rome. The light will defeat the dark.
I'm gonna miss you, buddy. Hail victory, protect the homeland, save the West, secure a future for our white children.
You have no idea how determined we will be to save this civilization, to save the West, to save this republic.
Of course they couldn't let the opportunity to exploit a tragedy slide. That's just show business. No, Kirk needed to become a symbol.
He's a martyr for truth and freedom.
They portrayed him as Western civilization itself.
He devoured the ideas that formed the foundation of our civilization. He was Athens and Jerusalem, the city of reason and the city of God in one person.
Sound familiar? The great conflict of the West, reason and revelation in one person, in one civilizational subject. This memorial is a testament to the success of the Claremont Institute in establishing its narrative deeply within the Republican Party.
That was a horrible attack on the United States of America. It was an assault on our most sacred liberties and God-given rights. The gun was pointed at him, but the bullet was aimed at all of us. That bullet was aimed at every one of us.
You know, there have been violent attacks against Democrats. 2 Democratic Minnesota lawmakers were assassinated. Do you know how Trump responded to a question of whether he might call the Minnesota governor in response to that?
I think the governor of Minnesota is so whacked out.
Did you know that Paul Pelosi, husband to former Democratic Congresswoman Nancy Pelosi, was attacked in his home? Huh. And let's see how Mr. Last Defense Against Western Civilization responded to that.
Crazy Nancy Pelosi who ruined San Francisco. How's her husband doing, by the way? Anybody know? And she's against building a wall at our border, even though she has a wall around her house, which obviously didn't do a very good job.
Did you know that Democratic Governor Josh Shapiro had his house set on fire while he and his wife and kids were sleeping in it? Did you know that the FBI arrested 13 men for trying to kidnap the Democratic governor of Michigan? Hey, did you know that the President of the United States incited a riot at the US Capitol and then tried to overturn the election? And did you know that he pardoned all of the rioters? Like all of them, including this guy, and this guy, and this guy. Or did we forget that? Oh no, but the violence is the radical left's fault.
The radicals on the right oftentimes are radical because they don't want to see crime. They don't want to see crime. They're saying, we don't want these people coming in. We don't want you burning our shopping centers. We don't want you shooting our people in the middle of the street. The radicals on the left are the problem, and they're vicious and they're horrible.
Sure, the Democrats are the ones who need to condemn violence, despite the fact that most of them did, despite the fact that many of them eulogized, no, even praised Kirk for his political life. But it's Democrats who are tearing this country apart.
For years, those on the radical left have compared wonderful Americans like Charlie to Nazis. This kind of rhetoric is directly responsible for the terrorism that we're seeing in our country today.
Oh, well, I'm sure this isn't the beginning of a crackdown on political dissidents or anything. Everything's fine.
So when you see someone celebrating Charlie's murder, call them out. And hell, call their employer.
We will absolutely target you, go after you, if you are targeting anyone with hate speech.
But the right didn't stop at targeting specific commentaries on Kirk. They took the opportunity to create an entire legal framework for targeting political enemies, something that would last beyond the current moment.
We're going to go after the NGO network that foments, facilitates, and engages in violence.
We are going to use every resource we have at the Department of Justice, Homeland Security, and throughout this government to identify, disrupt, dismantle, and destroy these networks and make America safe again for the American people. It will happen, and we will do it in Charlie's name.
A week after Charlie's death, Trump designates Antifa as a terrorist organization. Now, we know that Antifa isn't an actual organization. Most leftists can barely organize their rooms. But the ambiguity of Antifa is useful. They've codified an internal enemy. Now all they need to do is make the argument. Anyone even slightly critical of Kirk or Republicans or Trump, well, perhaps there's an argument to be made that they're actually Antifa.
NPR, sir. Regarding designating them a terrorist organization, when they don't have defined leadership or membership, how do you target them?
We're going to find out. Did they have anything to do with your network?
Republicans have been waiting years for something like this. If anyone's celebrating Charlie Kirk's death, it's them. This is the perfect excuse to push that civilizational struggle narrative with full force, exactly as Charlie predicted.
They are trying to make you do something that will be violent, that will justify a takeover of your freedoms and liberties, the likes of which we have never seen.
We know these elites don't represent the country, and if we're going to do anything to fight back, then we have to confront the question behind all of this. Who is an American? What is America? I think the country deserves an answer to these questions. It isn't a question that belongs to the left or the right. It is a national question that will determine the future of whatever shape or name America takes next. Liberal capitalism only offers an answer deferred. Trumpism offers an answer so finite that only few will survive it. What answer can the left offer? The crisis didn't begin in 2016. The crisis, the great political theater that defines America, that started in 1776 when America first understood itself as a nation. The crisis is the conflict between its universalist creed and its oppressive, destructive, and all but universalist actions. Contemporary American fascism feeds off of the crisis by providing a simple answer. It combines a historical narrative with feel-good metaphysical principles. Let's perhaps naively take this narrative at face value and evaluate it with facts and logic. Perhaps with a little reason, revelation even. We address 3 of contemporary American fascism's claims. Number 1. Western civilization is superior because it embodies the conflict of Greek wisdom and biblical wisdom, or some other made-up definition of Western civilization. Number 2. America is the highest synthesis of the Western tradition. Number 3. America can only be a vessel for Western greatness if we maintain the greatness and coherence of the American people. Once we've addressed these 3 claims, we'll have a better understanding of how to answer the America question. Let's start with that claim about Western civilization. The term Western civilization is kind of an ambiguous grouping of a lot of different things. Like, sure, we've got Athens and Jerusalem, but what about all those cultures that were eaten up by the Roman Empire? What about the absorption of ancient Egyptian and Levantine culture into Greek culture? That's hundreds of years of a bunch of different cultures eating each other. Charlie often claimed that Islam and wokeism were out to destroy the West.
But the spiritual battle is coming to the West, and the enemies are wokeism or Marxism combining with Islamism to go after what we call the American way of life.
Well, there's a few problems with that.
When parts of Western Europe lost direct access to Greek philosophical texts after the fall of Rome, these works continued to circulate, evolve, and be contested elsewhere, especially in the Islamic world, where scholars translated, interpreted, and often argued with Plato and Aristotle for their own intellectual and political purposes. These Islamic philosophical traditions profoundly shaped medieval European thought. There is no Aquinas without Avicenna.
Not to mention that the Islamic world was going through an entire golden age that would deeply influence later Western science. Ever heard of numbers? You know, from math? And what about that other enemy? Marxism. Fine, sure, let's talk about Marxism. It is a video essay after all. Marxism is not going to destroy the West. Western Marxism is a direct product of the Western Enlightenment values that Kirk claims it's out to destroy. Critical theory is a product of the Western critical tradition of philosophical critique.
Comes out of critical theory, which came out of the Frankfurt School.
The Frankfurt School? Okay, well, let's read what Theodor Adorno, the Frankfurt School guy, had to say about his big critique of Western Enlightenment.
It should mean, and can only mean, that we also recognize the wounds which Enlightenment has left behind as the moment where Enlightenment itself betrays its own imperfect character and reveals that it is actually not yet enlightened enough. And it is only by pursuing the principle of enlightenment through to the end that these wounds may perhaps be healed.
Do you know what the actual argument is here? It's that the Enlightenment, you know, the whole Western philosophical movement that promoted reason and ushered in modernity, kind of a big deal, well, that Enlightenment didn't play out according to plan, according to the Frankfurt School. Too much reason for its own sake eats itself. It leads to an extreme rationalization of human life that essentially falls into fascism, genocide, and war. I'd even go as far as to argue that this is the fundamental claim of what we call wokeism today. This is the lesson of the 20th century that the Frankfurt School, and I guess wokeism, is trying to draw out. And it's something conservatives would agree with if they weren't stupid. Reason without faith is destructive. Faith without reason is blind and unprincipled. Hey, sound familiar? There's your Western synthesis, buddy. Remember the whole Athens and Jerusalem stuff you pretend to care about? Western critique, aka wokeism, aka DEI, Marxism, is literally the culmination of Western civilization! Now let's address the second point, that the American founding is somehow the perfect synthesis of the Western tradition. So in one sense, this is partially true. Like, the founding fathers envisioned America as a country that would embody Western Enlightenment principles. Now, there are a lot of good Western Enlightenment principles. A lot of them are pretty inspiring. They inspired tons of revolutions like the French Revolution, the Haitian Revolution, a ton of social movements. Alexander Hamilton said it pretty well in Federalist No. 1.
It has been frequently remarked that it seems to have been reserved to the people of this country, by their conduct and example, to decide the important question whether societies of men are really capable or not of establishing good government from reflection and choice, or whether they are forever destined to depend for their political constitutions on accident and force.
That was, at the time, a pretty unique and radical idea. The idea that it's possible to create a government by choice rather than by force or conquest or heritage. Now, don't get me wrong, I'm not saying that America wasn't established by force or conquest. We know it was. But just for a second, we can appreciate the underlying idea. Anyone who believes in social justice has to believe that it is possible for a people to choose and deliberately establish a just, consensual, and free society. There's a lot to love in America's founding documents. All men, oops, already fumbled. America canceled? All people are created equal, endowed with inalienable rights. That's not so bad, honestly. And that's why generations of American activists continue to quote the Declaration of Independence. Sure, we can acknowledge that America from the beginning has betrayed its founding principles, definitely. Most of the founding fathers were well-off, property-owning white males, many of whom literally owned enslaved people. American wealth was built by enslaved labor and through the genocide of indigenous people. This is literally just the reality of history. So should we concede that the American founding is simply the project of an elite, wealthy minority and that it is thus fundamentally tainted by those interests? Is America really a people? No, because the American founding does not belong to the founders. The American founding did not happen in the moment when a bunch of white guys came together to debate and sign documents. The land we call colonial America contained a diverse population of indigenous peoples, free and enslaved black people, immigrants, a marginalized working class. The American Revolution didn't start with the Declaration of Independence, it began with scattered riots, protests, uprisings. Who do you think were the first people to riot in the name of liberty? These guys? Absolutely not. The first death of the American Revolution was that of Crispus Attucks, a man of mixed black and indigenous ancestry, a working class sailor who died throwing a piece of wood at a British soldier during the Boston Massacre. Even the writing of the Constitution was a bitter battle over class interests, not some grand civilizational document. You think the Constitution was simply birthed out of the genius minds of a few dudes in wigs? No, the writing of the Constitution happened when Shays' Rebellion scared wealthy creditors into realizing that ordinary people could shut down the government. It happened when popular assemblies voted for debt relief, causing elites to panic at the prospect of democracy. The Bill of Rights, you know, the thing with all the freedom of speech and religion and stuff, only existed because of the popular pressure at the time. America has never belonged to the elite, nor is it some perfectly planned project perpetuating pure Enlightenment principles. Preposterous. The American founding is a story of real, material, social conflict. Conflict has always been at the root of this country. It has been a long and bitter struggle between actual living people. That is neither a sign of its greatness or some mortal sin, it is simply a testament to the unstoppable force of history. Which brings me to the final claim in the fascist narrative. The claim that America can only be a vessel for Western greatness if we maintain the greatness and coherence of the American people. For fascists, America isn't an idea, it's a people. Their people. But how should we respond? Do we maintain that America is simply an idea? No. If we return to pure idealism, we risk denying the centrality of social struggle in American life and repeating the mistakes of neoliberalism. To understand how we answer this question, we have to look at another key influence on American fascism today, Carl Schmitt.
Schmitt was a German conservative thinker and critic of liberalism active in the 20s and 30s. So, naturally, he was literally a Nazi. Like, yes, a member of the National Socialist German Workers' Party. Unsurprisingly, a lot of fascists today love Schmitt, especially associates of the Claremont Institute. How shocking. But what did Carl Schmitt actually believe, besides, literal Nazism? Schmitt argued that all politics fundamentally boils down to the friend and enemy distinction. This is in direct contrast with liberal values. Liberalism promotes a politics of universal humanity, united in the name of egalitarianism. But Schmitt says that this is an impossible ideal. In his view, all politics requires identity categories, some of which are fundamentally incompatible with each other. Any political collective is going to create some definition of what it means to be a part of the people, and also what it means to not be a part of the people. Schmitt never explicitly said that this had to be a racial or ethnic thing. He argued it was possible to build a national identity around a shared ethics or history. But considering that Schmitt was a Nazi, it's easy to see how this thinking ends up justifying fascist hierarchy in some form.
Fascists use this friend-enemy logic to justify the end of politics itself. If politics is the continuous struggle to define the terms of power, fascists seek to close that struggle. They seek to impose one singular, unchanging version of truth and peoplehood. They try to repress social conflicts with religion, racial hierarchy, nationalism. In political theory, democracy is usually defined as a form of government where political sovereignty lies in the people. But fascists argue that political sovereignty lies in some predictable totality. God, tradition, heritage, nature. Conservatism and fascism share that fundamental claim. They pretend that they somehow have access to some complete metaphysical truth, but they don't. Because, prove it. No one has access to the complete truth about God or some other universal truth. Everything humans do collectively, like government, institutions, communities, all of that is the product of human action. Sure, there are some people who think they represent God or that they represent some other totality, but ultimately, those are always human interpretations, human actions. And this is why conservatism is always a self-exploding concept. Totalities are always just people, and democracy is the only form of government that understands this. If whatever God conservatives worship, whether it be the Christian God, the fascist state, the natural order, blood and soil, if all of those things were so true and self-evident, then why do they always seem to use force to impose them? Why do they have to force schools to teach about Jesus?
We have to lead as Christians because what the left is doing is a top-down imposition of an agenda of a Marxist and anti-God and anti-family agenda.
Why are they forcing federal troops into their political opposition's cities? Well, let's hear Charlie Kirk's idiotic and insane justification.
They complain that America itself is authoritarian, so why wouldn't they also think that President Trump's takeover of Chicago is authoritarian? But you have to know what you are aiming at. This is why classical philosophy is so important in all this. The natural law explains all of this. I have a much more of a biblical Hobbesian view of nature, that God created us good, but there was a fall, and that sin is inherent in our nature, and that we need redemption.
Wait a second, Charlie. Weren't you just criticizing Islam for this doctrine like 5 seconds ago?
Islam is not compatible with Western civilization. We as Christians believe in freedom of speech. Islamists do not believe in freedom of speech. What is the ultimate value claim of Christianity? It is truth. In Islam, it is not truth. It's domination, subjugation, conquest. Islam is taking over
by force. And so what President Donald Trump is doing with this National Guard is he's exposing the wretched.
Which is it, guys? Force or truth? Like I said, self-exploding concept. But sure, Christian nationalists are the ones who are the true practitioners of freedom of speech, which is why they're targeting left-wing organizations that criticize Charlie Kirk, deporting people speaking out against the genocide of Palestinians, pressuring to pull funds from universities who don't fall in line, threatening to revoke the licenses of TV stations who say disagreeable things. Should I go on? Are we supposed to just ask for things to go back to normal? Are we going to go back to when liberals and conservatives collaborated to institute a global capitalist order that got us into this shit in the first place? Don't we remember what happened last time? Global inequality, institutional collapse, and yes, Trump himself. In the 1990s, the leftist political theorist Chantal Mouffe actually predicted this predicament. And what foresight, because these days, the critique of liberal democracy is looking more relevant than ever. Does this mean that fascists like Carl Schmitt were right? Mouffe argues that maybe Schmitt was onto something. Not about the fascism, obviously fascism is horrendous and juvenile, but maybe politics does have an inherent friend and enemy divide, or something like it. Conflict is inherent to any complex society, and liberal democracies offer no real way of dealing with that conflict. As Mouffe wrote in the year 2000,
Schmitt's thought serves as a warning against the dangers of complacency that a triumphant liberalism entails. It should shatter the illusion of all those who believe that the blurring of frontiers between left and right, and the steady moralization of political discourse constitute progress in the enlightened march of humanity towards a new world order and a cosmopolitan democracy.
She was right. Liberalism by itself offers empty moralism, directionless compromise, the false promise to end conflict, to end history, and what happened? History came back to bite it in the ass. Democracies always require the creation of an us versus them. After all, how can the state claim to represent the will of the people if we don't know who the people is or what they want? On the other hand, liberalism is a universalist philosophy. There is no particular people in liberalism, only humankind. In a liberal democracy where we combine the two ideas, we get a paradox. In a big old society, not everyone is going to agree on everything. One person might say that they express their individual freedom by roundhouse kicking babies, but the majority might argue that, hey, maybe we shouldn't roundhouse kick babies. Democracies always place limits on individual freedom in the name of maintaining the will of the majority. At the same time, preserving freedom or any other universal right always requires limits on democracy. If most people suddenly want to roundhouse kick babies, but the Constitution states that every human has the right not to be roundhouse kicked, then that sucks for most people. All liberal democracies have this inherent paradox, a fundamentally unresolvable antagonism. But Mouffe argues, well, what if this paradox isn't actually a bad thing? What if democratic conflict isn't destructive but generative? What if openness, the eternal struggle for hegemony, is actually the condition for democratic possibility? Because think about it. If some entity somehow claimed to have solved a conflict, then there wouldn't be a need for democracy anymore, would there? The proposed solution to conflict would replace the democratic process. But that's fascism. That's the imposition of some closed totality. It's easy to be seduced by the idea of a conflict-free society. That's why fascism is so irresistible for a lot of people. But don't be. It doesn't exist. This is why fascism always fails at the functional level. There is no solution to conflict. There is no totality. There will always be antagonism, and no matter how hard we try to deny it, conflict always returns. As a revolution, as a civil war, as uprising, as regime change, as alienation. And the only system capable of contending with all of that, of dealing with our fundamental antagonism, is democracy. But then how do we deal with the democratic paradox? Democracy is not what happens in the moment when consensus is reached. Democracy is not the end of conflict or the resolution of conflict. Democracy is the continuous push and pull of collective conflict, the continuous building of consensus. As Mouffe puts it,
liberal democracy is precisely the recognition of this constitutive gap between the people and its various identifications.
But how does this work exactly? What does that mean? Does that mean we just institute a free market and live and let live? No, that's what neoliberalism tried to do, and it failed horrendously.
The lie of the West, of modernity, is that we're going to have you live and let live, and there will be no moral standard. That itself is a moral standard, and it's a really bad one.
And I agree with Charlie here to some extent. You can't have a functioning society if we're all just doing whatever we want. But Charlie's idea of political authority is extremely weak. Since Charlie's positions are extremely unpopular, his party tries to solve that by imposing itself by force. Authoritarians like him are unable to bring communities together or understand the needs and desires of a people. Democracies are strong because their legitimacy comes from the consent and participation of a politically defined community of people. It requires no imposition, or at least no total imposition. That's what Charlie and Republicans don't understand.
We had what you might consider stability in the previous century, and then it became unstable because moral absolutism was imposed.
Moral absolutism was lost. You see, modernity rose. We started to teach our kids moral relativism, and we got rid of moral absolutes.
This is a false dichotomy. Just because moral standards are not imposed from above does not mean that these standards don't exist. Mouffe argues that to have a thriving democratic society, you can't have a situation where each side considers their political enemies as fundamentally different existential threats. But that doesn't mean we have to get rid of conflict either. She proposes a politics that is agonistic. An agonistic politics is a politics between adversaries. Each side sees the other side as legitimate, as fundamentally human, as sharing the same fundamental principles. The disagreement lies in how we interpret and implement these principles.
The adversary is, in a certain sense, an enemy, but a legitimate enemy with whom there exists a common ground. Adversaries fight against each other, but they do not put into question the legitimacy of their respective positions. They share a common allegiance to the ethico-political principles of liberal democracy. However, they disagree about their meanings and their forms of implementation, and such a disagreement is not one that could be resolved through rational argument, hence the antagonistic element in the relationship.
So yeah, that means that we can't live in a society where most institutions are privatized. Democracies thrive in societies with strong public institutions, strong levels of citizen participation and practice. This only works if we create institutions that encourage citizens to actually participate in politics. Strong educational institutions, a robust civic life, spaces for agonistic public discourse, and importantly, arenas to put these conflicts into actual practice. To make this more concrete, here's a smaller scale example of an adversarial relationship in a political community. In the gay community, there was, and still kind of is, this big debate over marriage equality. Should the gay rights movement focus on the right to marry? Or, in other words, should gay people fight to be included in the institution of marriage, thus potentially expanding and strengthening what that institution has historically represented in the hope of maybe changing its meaning for the better? Or should gay people stand firmly against the institution of marriage and argue that actually no one should be married because all the institution of marriage does is create a private individualist nuclear family that perpetuates insidious forms of gender domination? Now, you can reasonably be on either side of this argument. But do you notice how the underlying question here is, how can we best promote the flourishing of queer people? Notice how that's different from so many of the political questions today, which ask things more along the lines of, should minorities have rights? Should queer people exist? Democracy doesn't work when groups see each other as existential threats. And if you've been paying attention to this video, we know which side is the one claiming that the other is an existential threat. We know who's been turning up the temperature. We know whose goddamn fault this is. But lest this become an eternal game of Spider-Man pointing at Spider-Man, let us finally answer the question initially posed at the beginning of this video. What is an American? For years, both Democrats and Republicans have tried to deny the centrality and necessity of social conflict. Neoliberal bureaucracies pretended that they could manage social conflict by promoting superficial corporate morality. Social conservatives allied with economic conservatives to hide social conflict behind the inherent inequality of the free market. We became afraid of confronting conflict directly. We became afraid of divisiveness and disagreement. Our obsession with ending political conflict threatened to end politics itself. This century has been a moment rich with political possibility. Social conflict has returned to the political imaginary. But instead, the tragedy of our time is that this political moment was seized by the Republican Party. While Democrats denied conflict, conservatives gained a chauvinistic self-awareness of their own place in social conflict. Conservatives identified themselves with the founders, with anti-democratic elitists, with Western civilization, with Judeo-Christian traditions, with what they call the original ethnic stock that they believe constitutes the American essence. Will Democrats ever gain any semblance of self-awareness? Will they find their identity in an American working class, in the democratic spirit of the civil rights movement, gay liberation, labor movement, with Crispus Attucks? Leftists have always understood politics as the struggle between historically evolving groups. The narrative of social struggle is central to leftism, but the key differentiator between leftism and fascism is that leftism believes, and I mean true, authentic leftism believes, that it is always possible, always necessary to struggle in the name of a universal, to struggle in the name of the people, not a people, but the people, the demos, the subject of democracy itself. This is a struggle that never ends and never begins. It is a struggle that continues in spite of the fact that there will never be a final moment when we once and for all identify who the people exactly are. Democracy, politics, is the history of that definitional process. Democracy without liberalism, or in a more precise sense, without universalism, leads to an aimless, subjectless society. Without universal principles, we're lost. But universalism without democracy leads to fascism. It leads to the institution of one singular definition of human against all others. Radical democracy is this synthesis in a practice. It is the material struggle over how we define universal human collectivity. There is an America that is an idea, an evolving interpretation of what it means to institute a government on the principle that humans are born free with inalienable rights. America is also a real living people who struggle for and against that idea, who struggle for and against each other. This is the openness that is poison to fascism. On July 4th, 2025, the New York mayoral candidate, Zoran Mamdani, tweeted an homage to the country he calls his own.
America is beautiful, contradictory, unfinished. I am proud of our country even as we constantly strive to make it better, to protect and deepen our democracy, to fulfill its promise for each and every person who calls it home.
It is this incompleteness, this unfinished project, that is the essence of all social justice. And that's why Zoran's post triggered gay space fascist J.D. Vance.
There is no gratitude in those words. And he dares, on our 249th anniversary, to congratulate it by paying homage to its incompleteness and to its, as he calls it, contradiction. Has he ever looked in the mirror and recognized that he might not be alive were it not for the generosity of a country he dares to insult on its most sacred day? Who the hell does he think that he is?
JD is mad because, as we discussed, fascism requires a false totality. It claims to be the heir to metaphysical wholeness. It cannot reckon with the reality of incompleteness. It denies conflict within itself and projects it onto some perceived outsider. This is how we get people like Charlie Kirk calling Zoran un-American for the crime of believing that America can be better.
The other component of the Mamdani thing is that he's a foreigner. He's obviously not an American.
Dear viewer, I wouldn't blame you for being disillusioned with America. Millions of people have been killed in its name. All I can say is that this is a nation that is not simply a name. It is over 300 million people and counting. It is a people who struggled to be a people. If you are American, then it's likely that your friends are American. Your neighbors are American. Your family is American. And even if they or you don't desire to fit whatever definition of America we could construct, you stand on a land that many people call America, under the jurisdiction of a government that calls itself American, for better or worse. Everyone on Earth, everyone exists on a planet whose very face has been shaped by a nation that calls itself America. The future of democratic politics depends on the ability of citizens to hold public institutions accountable. The moment to do that is now. This country exists. It shapes us. It shapes others. Your personal disavowal of it does not change that if you don't act on it. How is it that MAGA has been able to seize so many of the levers of power we once thought untouchable? Because they understand the most important element of politics today, social struggle. And they wield that understanding in a frightening way. They don't care about norms or ethics. They will abandon any and all beliefs for more power. These are not adversaries. They do not see you as adversaries or legitimate partners in debate. That's over. Enough about going high when they go low. Enough about bridging divides. They were offered that chance, and they have shown us that they don't want to take it. This doesn't mean that we shouldn't do the work in publicly defending our ideas through means like debate, dialogue, and public outreach. I mean, how do you think that the right built such a popular base? They understand how to articulate their interests to the public in a popular political language, even if it's in reality superficial and disingenuous. Even if we disavow the right wing, there's a lot to learn from their strategy. If we have anything to learn from them, it's that we have to care about meeting people where they are, about naming people's anger. And the wonderful thing about having principles is that the left actually offers a solution to people's problems. Affordable and available social services, participatory institutional structures, and a future where millions of people aren't in goddamn camps. In sociologist W.E.B. Du Bois' magnum opus, Black Reconstruction in America, he describes a brief period after the American Civil War where formerly enslaved Black Americans experienced an unprecedented moment of genuine democratic participation. It was real. It was true and struggled for, and it was gone too soon before it was crushed by white supremacist violence. As Du Bois writes, the slave went free, stood a brief moment in the sun, then moved back again towards slavery. If even after the country's darkest hour, the sun once shined on America and its citizens, however brief, is it not possible that it might shine again?
Hey guys, the video actually isn't over. It's over when I say it's over. So I'm really lucky to be able to call YouTube my full-time job, but the channel often hangs on by a thread. I'm very transparent about how much I make on Patreon, and even though I'm lucky to make anything at all, it puts me in a tough position as I have to balance using this money to pay my bills, pay rent and live, but also fund the videos and keep the main channel videos free for everyone. So if you're in a position to support the channel at all, I would really appreciate you helping make these videos possible by contributing on Patreon. The Patreon is full of exclusive content like video essays you can't find on YouTube, and my podcast, Peer Review, where I talk to other creators. I also host live discussions with my patrons, and recently did a live 2-hour lecture on accelerationism, the recording of which is available to watch right now. And just to be TBH and sincere here, the people on my Patreon tend to be some of the most thoughtful, interesting, and critical people in this whole void we call the online political sphere. So if you've been looking for a left-wing online space that isn't a cesspool of rage, but that's still entertaining and forward-facing and based, the Patreon community and Discord community honestly give me a lot of hope. You can access the Patreon for as little as $2 a month, which is less than the price of a Taco Bell burrito. And what a shame that is, huh? The videos on my YouTube channel are free to watch, but they aren't free to produce. Well, now that the e-begging is over, I'd like to thank the people who helped with the creation of this video. Thanks to the patrons who helped read the quotes, and of course, my patrons for supporting this channel. Let's shout some of you out. _WR, Owen K, 6 Slugs, A Pile of Candies in a Corner, A Silly Goose, Adrian, AE, Ahmed Harasik, Aiden Lisandro, Aluri, Alex Cox, Alex Fainstock, Alex French, Alex Moores, Alexander Smallwood, Alexis Adkins, Alnara, Amaranta, Annabelle, Andrea Maurici, Andrea Schreiber, Andrew June, Annika, Ant Avila, AP Zelos, Arcee, Ari Lord Piru, Ari the Warrior, Armin Ritchie, Arto, Arun Donti, Ash Finn, Ataplease, Adun Elvanis, Ara Vale, Ava Orkut, Avery, B. Dutz, Bartolos Flute, Bierick, Beatrice Dahl, Becca B., Benjamin Perry, Bert Spielpenning, Beilua, Big Guy Goon, Bitchy, Bobby Jane Disforges, Brandon Uzumaki, Brenda Macias, Brenna, Brett Medley, Cest Moi, Candace H., Captain Mike, Casey, Kat, Kaylin S., C. Schaefer, Celeste Irwin, Chaby, Charles Harrow, Charlie Rose, Cherisher of Cats, Chloe, Chloe Phone, Chris Scalzi, Christopher D., Closeted History, Colorful Cast, Conan, Corey Clark, Cosmic Spring, Dan, Daniel Drexler, Daniel Martins, Daniel Torma, Kidney, Daniela de Leon, David B., David Erasmus McDonald, David Franck, December Vesalius, Dico T., DJ, Dominic, Don Hopkins, Dorothy Spencer Gale, Dr. Skullduggery, Drainix, Dropout Ninja, Egan Blake, Eleanor of Aquitaine, Eli, Emil, Amila Violet, Emma, Emmy Murphy, Eric Junholm, Ermine, Eruhachi, Esther Jones, Ava Bloom, Eyes of a Tragedy, Fat Kirk, Faye Kingit, Fickle Happy, 5 Raccoons in a Trenchcoat, Flip, Francois Denoy, Gabby D'Amico, Gabriela Surita, Gabrielle Stitchway, Garbage Patch Kid, Gex, Gian Belong, Gibran E., Gray Rainier, Griff Q, Jim Cap, Heather, host of Craftlit, Heather Fracechild, Henry McCready, Hida, Hog, Hope Jason Tuliana, Hunter Mon, HVAC Ghost, I Am Good Enough, ENT Gray, In the Past Lane, Ipsy, Irritated Nick, Isaac Uduj, Jack Beck, Jack Bennett, Jake Vossen, James Earl, Jamin Flood, Jason Wolf, Jay Eaton, J.D. Forth, Jeff Sheehy, Jennifer A. Callahan, Jenny Tang, Jeremy Winter, Jess, Jesuis, Jiminy's Journal, Joe Bjerklin, John Meliski, Joshua Clark, Joxon S. Costello, Joy Palmer, JT, Julie Werner, Julia Herzog, Julia Lavender, Jr., Justin Chapman, Just Ono, Kane Zwolinski, Kara Goolsby, Katie Liljenquist, Kelmani, Kiera Williams, Kilo Whale, Koalu, Comey, Kristen Sardessen Cole, Kurtz Harem, Kazatka, L, Lady of the Night Vale, Lamb Shader, Lana Baker, Laura Bauma, Lauren Walsh, Lav Mana, Leash, Liam, Lima Bean, Lin Shi, Lindana, Lindsay Mercer, Link Play Space, Liz Hirschman, Lizard Lee, Logan Lind, Logan Yu, Logjack, Lucy, Lucid, Louisa, L Winner, M.E., M.H. Denigan, Madeline S., Mads, Mahala Byrne, Malib Adrian, Malpertuous, Manway, Marcos Preston, Marked, Merixis, Mars Rover, Mate Metzing, Matthias, Maya S., Mayowa Aodel, Maz Swift, M. Dog Lover, Megan Lowndes, Maya Ogolo, Michael Chen, Michael Gallisby, Michael Raleigh, Mike Carter, Mingo, Miska, Miwome, MMM, Momo Mateo, Monty 42, Moth, Misadventure, Muhammad Amari, MX, Naomio, Nathan Lund, Nawerg, Neo Parm 2, Nice Morphism, Nick H, Nick Urzetik, Nico, Nolan Wiedmer, Nifan, Omar Apollo's Strongest Soldier, Orankers, Owen Pattinson, Oyster Philosophy, Paige Ray, Parpoof, Pat Leon, Patrick Luce, Paul Anthony Atkins, aka Jeronis Lehrer, Penguin with a Tie, Pepper Pengu, Per Aspera, Phantom Flavor, Philly the Davy, Plato and the Rave, Pleb Notes, Pooja Mudasani, Pre. Quack 777 77 777 77 77777 77777 77. Raiden Roseboro. Raul Inksy. Raunchy Beeves. Rain B. Rionar James. Rebecca Villa. Ricci. Rich Ita. Richard Knight. Robot Spock. Robin. Roderick. Rosamori of the Sea. RSS. Rune the Lycanthrope. Rune PG. Riley Ammons. Sadia Shiraj. Sam Gersel. Sarah S. Max. Scout O'Keefe. Sean Petrick. Sean Voracek. Serena Steiber. Seven Las Caras. SG. Shay Andrews. Shemi. Shyam. Simon. Sophie Morrison. Spaghetti Raccoon. Spiff Low. Spinoli. Stas. Steven. Still Ludo. Stolit Silas. Sunshine Type. Super Unsubtle. Swiss Woke. Sydney Schultz. Taika Grubasish. Tedney. The Mandalorian. Theo. Think Peace Tribe. This Guy Donor. Tim B. Tim Barrett. Timo. Tofu Gore. Tom Hempel. Tony Gallagher. Tony Whitson. Toothless Hawkins. Twilla 27. Tyler Lemieux. Tyler Amaker. Tyler Edwards. Tyler Stefani. Guardito. Valued Customer. Vaya con Fritos. Victory. Vince. Vincent Hollander. Violet Chavez Gilbrade. Vivid Disciple. Vivki. Vlad Savranov. Wainoa. William Thomas. Winter Holiday. Yeet Pog. Yolaine. Yona. Yori. Yordis the Tortoise. Z. Zach Paris. Zan Witt. Zeddy Scouse.